3 minutes after 10 is the time. It's Thursday. You have probably noticed this, but have you registered the fact that all things being equal, that means Mystery Hour will be on us at 12 o'clock today, unless the government deliberately seek to scupper the best laid plans of mice and men, with that release of the Dominic Raab bullying report. 2 reports bubbling under the surface today. One into the appointment of the bloke who had facilitated an enormous loan facility for Boris Johnson by Boris Johnson, who didn't reveal that he'd facilitated an enormous loan facility for Boris Johnson before Boris Johnson appointed him to the chairmanship of the BBC. That report is due to drop any moment, although, of course, Richard Sharp remains in his job. Me neither. And Dominic Raab, who is Deputy Prime Minister, facing multiple allegations of bullying from multiple people, also, of course, remains in his job. He was sitting next to the Prime Minister yesterday, but we are expecting that report to drop, as they say, today, I think. It seems to be the clever money, of which I am no part at all. No insights, no contacts, no snouts or deep throats in this administration, but it looks to me as if the people who do cultivate contacts with Downing Street are united in the belief that it is likely to drop today, although nobody seems to have much of a clue what is in it. What I can tell you is that the decision on whether or not to sanction Dominic Raab will lie exclusively with the Prime Minister. Now, historically, traditionally, it would be with the advisor on ministerial ethics, but Sunak didn't have one when he came into the house, into Downing Street, because Boris Johnson had lost 2 for, well, essentially 2 of them resigned in protest at his own lack of ethics, Boris Johnson's lack of ethics, and Liz Truss didn't think she needed one. No, me neither. So he didn't have one when he sort of called the inquiry. He's got one now, but it's been undertaken by a Casey. That's the one area, really. There's lots of areas where I forget to upgrade or upgrade, ridiculous phrase, when I forget to swap out Queen for King, and Casey QC is one of them. But the Casey who's undertaken it doesn't have. This is such a mess, this, actually. I'll tell you what we're talking about first hour in a minute, but this is such a mess because normally, the advisor on ministerial ethics takes a view and says, essentially in terms, that position is unsustainable. It's what Sir Alexander Allen did with Priti Patel when she was Home Secretary and found to be a massive bully. But, of course, Boris Johnson ignored her. So when I say to you, normally, that an inquiry like this would offer up an indication or guidance or even a decision on whether or not a senior politician should be sanctioned, you could turn around to me and say, don't talk nonsense, James. Boris Johnson but he was supposed to follow the guidance of Sir Alexander Allen, which is why Sir Alexander Allen didn't stay in the job for any longer. So even those most simple traditions and presumptions have been blown apart by the bloviating buffoon Boris Johnson. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. It's going to be quite interesting. Sunak's promise on the steps of 10 Downing Street to bring back professionalism, accountability and integrity, which, of course, withered to nothing 4 or 5 hours later when he put Suella Braverman back in the Home Office 5 or 6 days after she'd been fired for a breach of the ministerial code, is back in the spotlight today. Perhaps. 6 minutes after 10 is the time, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's return to territory with which we are familiar, but about which I remain relatively confused. It was the turn of the Chief Constable of Manchester Police yesterday on Nick's show to claim that he didn't believe he had the clarity or the communication skills to use the phrase institutional racism correctly and importantly. It is something which the police up and down the country is clearly suffering from, but it was Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, who joined Mark Rowley, the Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police, in essentially rejecting the words because he doesn't feel he has the ability to use them properly, and he's worried that people who don't understand what they mean are going to get too upset. Prioritising the feelings of people who don't understand what institutional racism is over the feelings of people who do is an example of institutional racism, Chief Constable. I'll say that again in case you don't understand that either. But prioritising the feelings of people who don't understand what institutional racism is over the feelings of people who do understand what institutional racism is an example of institutional racism. Can someone stick that on a mug and send it to Sir Mark Rowley over at Scotland Yard, or possibly hot-footed up to Manchester so that Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable up there, can get it? I'm going to say it again, actually, because it is so simple to understand that I think almost anybody would be capable of comprehending it. If you prioritise the feelings of people who do not understand what institutional racism is over the feelings of people who do, then you are engaging in institutional racism. Discuss. And also, of course, disgusting. Here he is talking yesterday to Nick Ferrari on LBC, the Chief Constable of the Greater Manchester Police, Stephen Watson.
The problem with the phrase institutional racism is it's also been applied by different people in different contexts across the board. And I'm not sure that the same discipline of interpretation is there. And as a result, it becomes something of a fluid descriptor. I think it is a little unclear as to what it means, but I do think there is a grave danger of almost reaching for a rigid interpretation of a well-thought-out definition, when actually the public will understandably take the view that if you say we're institutionally this, that, or the other, that means as an organisation we either genuinely don't care, we genuinely don't find that behaviours of the sort described are somehow inimical to our values, or at best we're just too incompetent to sort it out. Now, I think it possible that a police force could be institutionally racist. I just don't think that applies to any of the UK police forces.
Of course, it was Louise Casey whose report was the latest to deploy the phrase institutional racism. Her inquiry into the Metropolitan Police came 30 years after the anniversary of Stephen Lawrence's murder. It was William Macpherson's inquiry into the Metropolitan Police that first introduced the phrase institutional racism to our political vocabulary. I listened to that interview yesterday. A touch of the Rees-Moggs, I felt. Very persuasive and quite a patrician drawl and lots of long words like inimicable, but talking utter twaddle. Because if you don't understand what institutional racism means, you become a symbol of, an example even of institutional racism. And to reject the definition or to reject the conclusion after Louise Casey's report, after William Macpherson's report, is arrogance bordering upon dangerous. And it was refreshing, therefore, to see the head of the Police Federation, which is the closest that the police service has to a trade union, saying today that he does accept the definition of the Metropolitan Police as institutionally racist and misogynistic and homophobic. So he's the first leader of a major British policing institution to accept the findings of that report from Dame Louise Casey last month. His name is Steve Hartshorn, and he is clearly a thoughtful man, not least because he knows he will get a backlash for these comments. He was elected chair of the Federation last year, represents more than 130,000 rank and file officers across England and Wales, and his explanation of how he arrived at this conclusion and indeed changed his mind, as a very wise man once wrote, there is no point having a mind if you never change it. I always pretend that was me, but it's essentially an upgrade of something the great philosopher Edward de Bono said before he set up U2. It's 11 minutes after 10, and he said, I read Louise Casey's report. He said, I read every page of Louise Casey's report, and I listened to people such as Mina Smallman, whose murdered daughters were photographed by officers, and that helped change his thinking. This is a great phrase. Acceptance is the first step to moving on. 11 minutes after 10, and I'm about to bring Brexit into it, so you can tick that one off on your bingo card. It's like Brexit. You can't solve a problem, you can't begin to fix a problem until you admit you've got a problem. I mean, that's true from alcoholism right through to government policy. How do you fix a problem when you're denying that the problem exists? How are we going to fix the problem of institutional racism? You might ask the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, to which he will respond by, I've got a great idea. It's inimicable. I've got a wonderful idea. I'm going to fix the problem of institutional racism by saying that we haven't got a problem with institutional racism. Yeah? It's brilliant. Just run that by me again. Well, a lot of people are worried that we've got a problem with institutional racism. Ergo, that's Latin, by the way. Ergo, I am going to deny that we've got a problem with institutional racism. Job done. It's pathetic, right? 12 minutes after 10. And Sir Mark Rowley, of course, has done the same. I'd quite like to speak to Steve Hartson. We don't often have guests, news-based guests on this programme, but he said this: "For me, I personally do accept the findings in the report. Partly because he's heard testimony from officers who had suffered at the hands of colleagues with supervisors too often turning a blind eye. He said, I represent a lot of those people that have come forward to speak. Some of my colleagues will probably not like the fact that I'm accepting there are institutional failings and biases with such a massive organisation. But there many will. And go, well, what's the harm in accepting it if we understand that it's not labelling every officer as institutionally racist, sexist, homophobic and corrupt? You can't say that these poor practices and certain behaviours must change. You just say that so that we can understand people's negative lived experiences to get better and improve on that. I'm going to say it again, actually. If you prioritise the feelings of people who don't understand what institutional racism is over the feelings of people who not only understand what institutional racism is but suffer from it within your institution, then you are actually proving the existence and engaging in institutional racism. I don't really grasp why that's hard to understand. And that's my first question for you this morning. Why is that so hard for people like the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester and the Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police Service to understand? Why do you think it is so hard for these old white men in positions of enormous power in organisations riddled with institutional racism to understand what institutional racism is? Question number one, genuine inquiry, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And question number two is a little bit more generous. Let's help them out. Let's throw them a bone, shall we? I know that they're big shot coppers with enormous police services at their beck and call. They've risen through the ranks to the very top of probably the two biggest police services in England and Wales. Birmingham might be a contender. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but no matter. What could you say to them to help them recognise the reality of this horror show? You think some of the stuff that's emerged, not just the rapists and the criminals in the ranks, but also, of course, the WhatsApp groups, the disgusting exchanges seen between officers whose names you won't remember in the same way that you can remember the name of Sarah Everard's murderer. Just seeing what passes for normal conversation, normal conduct in the police service. And yet they reject the use of the word institutional. So genuinely, question number one, how could you possibly have a problem with this idea? Question number two, can we help them out? Can we show them what it actually is? Let's hear a little bit more from Stephen Watson yesterday.
I think the phrase has become politicised in certain circles. I do think it difficult. It's certainly not a term that I would accept in respect of Greater Manchester Police, because my sense, of course, is that institutionally, we're against these behaviours. Institutionally, our values are designed to eradicate these behaviours. And institutionally, if somebody is found guilty of behaving in these ways, we root them out and boot them out, and we do that really ruthlessly. People do not differentiate between the nuanced, balanced interpretation as was set forth in Macpherson and the otherwise assertion that people will very often put to our people at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're institutionally X, Y, or Z. Your boss says you are these things, therefore you are these things. And I just get the very uncomfortable feeling that a lot of our troops will say, I'm not entirely sure what you're apologising for, boss, but it isn't for my behaviour, because I find these things reprehensible, as do most of my colleagues. And so it isn't designed in any way to, I hope, come across as defensive, because I think it's universally recognised. We have people in our ranks who ought not to be there, who conduct themselves in a racist, homophobic, on and on goes the list. I just think we draw the distinction between those who let the side down and the mass.
The question, of course, is how can those who let the side down remain so prevalent and so disproportionately represented in a force? And the answer is institutional racism, or, of course, sexism, misogyny, or homophobia. So question number one, why do you think that police officers like Stephen Watson and Mark Rowley are so keen, so desperate, I would say, to reject the findings of Dame Louise Casey and Sir William Macpherson, that police services can be and indeed are institutionally racist? And the second question is a really important one. Do you think we can help them? So when they say, oh, no, we can't use that phrase because all the officers who aren't racist will get upset. If you're a police officer who's not racist, is he right? Is he correct that you as a police officer who's not racist don't like the phrase institutionally racist because you think that it would somehow tar you with the same brush? 0345 6060 973. But even more generously, perhaps, can we explain to Stephen Watson and Sir Mark Rowley what the phrase institutionally racist means in a way that allows them to use it clearly and communicate to their members why it is the correct phrase to use? I mean that. An example, if you like, of institutional racism. So there's 3 calls to arms here, and I make no apology for that. I'm sick of doing all the hard work on this programme. It's time you started pulling your weight, quite frankly. Question number 1, why do you think they're so keen to dismiss the reality of institutional racism? 0345 6060 973. Question number 2, can we help them come to an understanding of what institutional racism is so that they can then clearly communicate it both publicly and privately in their execution of duty as the heads of institutionally racist police forces? And question number 3, as a police officer, I know there are certain limits on what you can and can't say to me, but you don't have to use your real name. I have to take a degree of what you do and say on trust. But here's the question. As a police officer who is not racist, could you just let me know whether you feel unfairly maligned when it is pointed out that you work in an institution that allows racism to go far more freely than it should? I mean that, because he's using you as a human shield. Here are 2 police officers, 2 chief constables, head of, in one case, a force found several times to be institutionally racist, in another it just must be, mustn't it? You're not going to have a different atmosphere in place in London than you are in Manchester. You're the human shield here. All of your misogynistic, racist, homophobic colleagues, all the ones who do the jokes and swap the memes and make the comments and engage in the abuse in the canteen or in the police station, all of those people are getting protected today by the chief constable claiming that if he were to call out the environment in which their behaviour can be not just tolerated but positively incubated, then it wouldn't be fair on you. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And a couple of people wondering why I pick on the accent. I'll tell you why I pick on the accent. I live in a country, I don't want to, and this isn't his fault, this isn't Stephen Watson's fault. I live in a country where people who talk like that are presumed to be talking sense. It's why Jacob Rees-Mogg is treated as an authoritative contributor to any conversation when the man is as thick as mince by any objective measure. So that's why you have to pick up on it. I'm encouraging people to stop doffing their caps and tugging their forelocks and to move beyond the accent and look at the actual words. And what the words tell you is this. I am denying the existence of institutional racism or claiming that it's too complicated a concept to properly deploy without realising that by doing so, I am proving the existence of institutional racism and actually showing myself to be part of it. It's 10:21. It is 24 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I have 3 questions for you. How can or why do senior police officers like Stephen Watson and Mark Rowley, why are they so keen to reject the conclusions of independent inquiries and independent reports finding forces to be institutionally racist? What can we do to help them use the phrase, understand the phrase, recognise why the phrase is important? And number 3, if you are a police officer who is not racist, or you think you're pretty sure you're not racist, I mean, how can any of us be sure? You're the human shield that people like him are using. They're saying that, you might be accused of racism, or people might be accusing you of racism, and therefore we can't acknowledge publicly that the force is institutionally racist. I just wonder how you feel about that. Gillian's in Mitcham. Gillian, what would you like to say?
Hello. So I'm looking at The Guardian from the 24th of February 1999, which provides 3 definitions of institutional racism.
Oh, yes.
Institutional racism is that which covertly or overtly resides in the policies, procedures, operations and culture
Well, that's
of
a
public
tick, isn't
or
it?
private institutions,
Yes.
reinforcing individual prejudices, and being reinforced by them in turn. Steve Andon, Director, Institute of Race Relations. Quite succinct, I thought.
Yeah, it works for me. It's pretty clear to see how that would apply to police services. People uncomfortable with The Guardian because of, well rehearsed lines about its biases or politics are more than welcome to ring me with the definitions of institutional racism that they get from their right-wing newspapers. I just want to make that absolutely clear. If The Sun has put together a nice, neat encapsulation of what this phrase actually means when it's used by people like Sir William Macpherson or Dame Louise Casey, then I'm more than happy to have you read those out on the programme as well. So I wouldn't want anyone to think that the provenance of the definition is grounds to query it. So why the reluctance to accept it? Why the determination to reject it?
They did it back 30 years ago after Stephen Lawrence died. They pushed back. They don't want to deal with it. They want to continue as is, which is why 30 years on, nothing's changed.
I've asked the question, so I can dispute the answers, but I can't dismiss them necessarily. I don't know that they want to carry on exactly as they are. I think you can be in denial about the reality whilst somehow simultaneously wanting to root out the problems you're denying, which sounds like cognitive dissonance, but, it's a public-facing role, isn't it? And he can be working tirelessly behind the scenes to fix something that he feels for PR or brand reasons he can't or personal reasons he can't publicly admit exists.
Yes, that's possible.
It is possible, isn't it? Thank you, Gillian. That's a perfect start. A reminder that we have been dancing on this particular pinhead for the best part of 30 years. Baroness Lawrence, of course, gave an interview yesterday in which she said the Metropolitan Police has failed to change in the 30 years since the murder of her teenage son, an incredibly damning indictment of a service, the Chief Constable of which still denies that institutional racism is a helpful phrase or an accurate one. I mean, you'd think somebody who's risen that far would be able to join the dots, wouldn't you? No? You'd think, well, hang on, Stephen Lawrence's mum is saying that the Met hasn't changed at all, and I've been giving interviews for the last month rejecting the use of the phrase institutional racism. Could there possibly be a link between those two phenomena, do you think? Or he'd have someone in his inner circle just saying to her. But then, of course, we're back to the Daily Mail land, aren't we? Where if you've got advisors on diversity or race relations, it's an absolute waste of money. You could have spent that on paper clips instead. It's astonishing how easy it is to unpick these nonsenses once you've got the appetite to unpick them. Deborah's in Lewisham. Deborah, what would you like to say?
Apologies if I'm not as succinct as I should be. I'm a bit starstruck.
Why? Who were you with?
Oh, just you.
Carry on, Deborah. Thank you. Stop being silly. What would you like to say?
Exactly. Basically, I'm saying because in denying that it exists, so if you can't, if somebody comes to you and says, this and this happened to me, and then you say, well, that's not racist or that's not homophobic or whatever, then the problem doesn't actually exist. So then you don't really have to say, well, I need to put a step in place to fix that particular thing, unless it's something that's really blatant or really violent, or even
So if you've got people using the N-word or people engaging in obviously unacceptable, borderline criminal behaviour in the context of inciting racial hatred, then that's pretty clear and binary. But for white people, the microaggressions and what we're told, what you're told is banter or what is passed off as comedy or humour, which the victim of which doesn't feel any of those things, but is often compelled to go along with it or to ignore it, because to do otherwise, as many callers have told us, would involve painting a target on your back. People like Watson and Rowley don't realise that is institutional racism.
Precisely. If you don't acknowledge the problem, then it's a very small problem. You don't need to put resources into it. You don't need to investigate it too much, and you don't have to admit that possibly you personally have engaged in those things. So his behaviour probably is implicated, so he has to deny.
And of course, part two of this is to poo-poo the existence of unconscious bias and to dedicate huge amounts of energy, or get your friends in the media to dedicate huge amounts of energy to denying the need for unconscious bias training.
Yes. I mean, even the way that he phrased... How did he phrase it exactly?
What?
The way that he described institutional racism as almost being bandied about indiscriminately. So it's the same way as people saying, well, if this is racist and that's racist, then is anything racist?
Yes, exactly.
Do you know those people?
I do. Yeah, I do. So because some people misuse the phrase, we're never going to use it at all.
Yes,
which is incredibly convenient because it allows us to pretend that the problem doesn't really exist. Also, that idea of you've got people being arrested at 3:00 in the morning, and the people being arrested are throwing various accusations at the police, of which one imagines institutionally racist is among the mildest epithets that are deployed in those sort of circumstances at 3:00 in the morning. But he's using that as a reason why he shouldn't be using the phrase either. I can't imagine there are many other circumstances in which he would say a drug dealer being arrested at 3:00 in the morning is accusing my officers of institutional racism. Therefore, I don't believe we should ever use the phrase institutional racism. It's incredible, really, isn't it? It's actually incredible.
Well, it's just it's really just a cop out.
But one of the best definitions of institutional racism is not realising how incredible it is when you do it.
Yeah.
Funny.
But also, it's very painful. I do understand and I do sympathise. I do work with a lot of older English people, and I do sympathise with the idea that you don't want to admit, because it is a nasty thing to say that this action that I took, this thing that I did, was racist. It's not something nice that somebody wants to admit.
No, it's absolutely awful.
I do understand why people would want to say, well, that's not racist and this isn't racist, but obviously somebody saying this particular thing or doing this particular thing is sexist or racist or homophobic, whereas all the other little things, well, that was just, I just meant that as a joke.
No,
I didn't mean it like that.
Yeah, well, that dreadful word banter is deployed endlessly in these sort of contexts. Thank you, Deborah, taking me a little late for the news without me noticing, which is a compliment as to how engaged I was with what you were saying. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines. 10:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the questions are threefold. It is a cop-out, if you pardon the pun, as quite a few of you are pointing out, of pretty exceptional size. He disagrees with the term because he has a sense that his force is not racist, institutionally racist. That's feelings over facts, says Ollie in Oxford. David is in Eltham. I live 2 minutes from where Stephen was murdered, and it has been a shadow that hangs over the community. I honestly believe that the people at the top of police forces don't believe in institutional racism and are, quotes, looking to do the right thing, end quotes, without actually believing that there is anything wrong. My question is it so embedded into our police that it would be impossible to get rid of? It's so obviously unhelpful to reject the phrase institutional racism, because however you dress it up, you're rejecting the reality. Or at the very least, you're rejecting the findings of independent reports into it conducted by people who are not blinded by or blinkered by loyalty or sort of indoctrination almost. When you become part of institutionalization is the word that I'm looking for. Flipping heck. That's it, isn't it? Institutionalised. I don't think it's racist. I know him. I know John. He's all right. I know he says the stuff. I know he does the P-word jokes and makes the comments about fried chicken, but he's not racist. But you're a black officer in that room, or a woke white officer, i.e. you're alive to racial prejudice, and you know it is racist. But the sergeant says it isn't. How do you describe that? It's institutional racism. How hard can it be for chief constables to understand that? And do you actually, we're going to open up a slightly less generous line of inquiry, do you believe them when they say they genuinely don't think it's helpful? Rob's in Maidstone. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
James, I worked in South Africa for 24 years, post-94.
Right.
So dealt with how do we move to a post-racial type of idea.
Yeah, just a bit.
That police officer is both stupid, privileged, and ignorant. And I'm sorry those are woke words, but I was flaming listening to him this morning because there's a difference between institutional racism and individual racism. And they both need to be handled appropriately. So an individual can be taught that they have an unconscious bias, that they've got ideas and say things that are inappropriate, that they deal in microaggressions.
Yes.
And that, but the institution itself is racist because the way in which it was formed meant that people were not like us were treated differently.
Yeah.
Whether that be 4 times the rate of black boys being stopped for stop and search as white boys, should that be that a 13-year-old black youth is more likely to get a formal caution than a 13-year-old white youth? Those are things that you need to look at an institutional level and stop this nonsense about trying to say, oh, but I'm not a racist, therefore where I work's not a racist.
Is there a more good faith? I mean, you use pretty strong words. I think the only woke thing you did was apologise for using them, actually.
Yeah, right.
But is there a more generous analysis of it than an almost willful ignorance of reality? I'm not sure there is.
I think at this point it has to be willful ignorance because we have 30 or 40 years of research about how these things operate.
We do.
So if I was to say, if I used a South African example and said to him, do you realise that when we tried to bring black people into management in South Africa, we discovered that the majority of them had been taught in Afrikaans and their mother tongue.
Gosh.
But business was being run in English. They therefore had a difficulty in getting through professional exams and getting promoted because they had accents. They'd go, oh, that's awful. The very same people would sit there and go, oh, well, you should be able to work with that. But in this country, we just seem to have this fear of saying we are a post-colonial imperialist state that was based on an idea of British exceptionalism and haven't been able to move forward.
And this doesn't involve a responsibility for you or me or Mark Rowley or Stephen Watson having to apologise for it personally for anything that happened 100 years ago. I saw one of these weird new political parties that have sort of sprung up in Nigel Farage's slipstream, some woman saying that she refuses to be ashamed of being white. And I thought, where the hell does that... Who's ever told her she should be ashamed of being white? It's an astonishing position to be in, which is, I suppose, deliberately whipped up by the kind of people who don't want institutional racism to be removed. What about simple reputation protection, though, Rob? I have a degree of loyalty to LBC, for example, even though there have obviously been people on the payroll that I found indefensible in every imaginable way, and I was lucky enough and free enough to be able to say so. But an attack upon my station is in some sense an attack upon me, and my gut feeling, my reflex reaction would be a little bit defensive. I said, no, all right, there might be a few bad apples over the years, but we're a good bunch. We mean well. We've got good values. That doesn't make me quite the three things you opened your contribution with, I don't think. Ignorant, stupid, and I forget what the other one was.
Privileged.
Well, I'm definitely that. So let's just focus on the other two.
Yeah, but you see, the purpose when you do culture work about getting values is then discussing how do we live them and what do our operational processes look like, and how do we work with people. And this is why I made the distinction early on about an individual who may have unconscious bias, have racist thought, have been raised in a certain way, being dealt with as one group,
right,
and the actual structures need to be reviewed. So when we talk, if we're going to look at representation in the police force, like people, oh God, why don't we do representation?
Yeah.
Well, we've just come into the end of Ramadan, right? So millions of Muslims have been fasting during the day.
Right.
I can guarantee that some of them are pretty damn miserable, and if stopped by the police, will not be completely deferential and smiling at them.
Might be a little more short-tempered than usual.
Might be
it's a reasonable conclusion to draw.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that they're bad people. They're doing something that is really key to their religion.
Yep.
Now, if I know it's Ramadan, and they may be Muslim, and they're not quite as engaged with me as they may have been 3 or 4 weeks ago, doesn't mean they're bad people, doesn't mean I'm a bad person. But it does mean I need to be aware that those things are going on.
And do you know what I'm going to do? I'm probably going to upset everybody by taking your analogy and running with it, but I would say the same to a police officer encountering someone whose team have just been thumped in the FA Cup final.
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
but James, it isn't about.
It's intelligent policing.
It's not that all police officers are
all
racist.
Arsenal fans.
No, or Arsenal fans.
Yes.
It is just that the way in which we've built this system isn't responsive to our culture as we are now. There's nothing to be ashamed of there.
No, or to keep apologising for, except perhaps from the institution to the actual victims of it. But for everybody who is not a member of an ethnic minority or for anybody to claim that everybody who's not a member of an ethnic minority somehow needs to keep apologising or feeling ashamed is I guess that's racism, isn't it? It's an attempt to incite racial division and racial hatred, whereas what Rob has described is an attempt to diffuse it and an attempt to reduce it. So again, why would two senior police officers, how could the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police be so tin-eared as to respond to reports finding institutional racism in police services by, at the very best, arguing that it's an unhelpful phrase because some people might use it to malign officers who aren't racist, and at the very worst, to deny its existence entirely. 10:43 is the time. Lloyd's in Lewisham. Lloyd, what do you reckon?
I reckon it's quite simple, to tell you the truth.
Go on, then.
For them to say that.
Yeah, cool.
He's either ignorant, ignored it, accepted it or went along with it, was complicit or did it. Now, to resolve it...
That's 5 choices. I thought you said it was going to be simple. That's 5 different... No, it is.
Because if he's the first one, ignorant, then he's probably the last person to resolve it because he's blind to what's around him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that ignorance, that's institutional, right? That ignorance is because he's not stupid, and I presume...
I don't know. He might be.
He might be stupid, but I don't know that you can become the chief constable of a major police service with actually... Well, you can become Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, but it's a much harder path.
I wouldn't say that, but what I will say is that if he was ignorant of it, couldn't see it, then he's probably the worst person to fix it.
Yeah. He's in denial.
If he ignored it and accepted it, and accepted it...
Then he's complicit.
Yes, but then he's kind of in a place to see what happens, see how to resolve it, but then how does he get over that hurdle of he has to admit it? Oh, look, I was part of that. I know how it goes. I've learnt now, I've grown, and I can now help fix it. That's going to be a hard horse to ride.
Yes.
And even harder if he actually did it. See, and so it's quite simple why that is. No,
well, and that's where the head of the Police Federation comes in. Let's accept that if we've made mistakes in the past or we haven't challenged things that are clearly are inappropriate, we can do now with pride to say, I accept the failings, but I now want to be part of a different future. That's the denial. He's not accepting the failings and he's not expressing a desire to be part of a different future. He's saying our values are completely at odds.
Yeah, but he's got to accept that he did it. Just like, as you say, and as I say as well, in the past I've said and done things that weren't good.
Of course.
And I will admit to it, especially to the people that I may have done it to, and hopefully grow from it and move on.
But if you don't admit to it, how do you move on? How do you grow from it? And on a meta level rather than an individual level, if you don't acknowledge the existence of a problem, how can you possibly promise to be fixing it?
Yeah, you're not going to brick again, are you?
I might do, but I haven't got time. Lloyd, thank you. 10:50 is the time. I just, in the minutes remaining this hour, before we move on, and I'm hearing the Raab stuff's going to be delivered to Downing Street at 11:30, so whether or not we get the response before mystery hour is currently a mystery. And I'm clear and comfortable with the criticism that's been levelled at Mark Rowley by association and Stephen Watson, the head of the Manchester Police Force Service, by callers today, and indeed by me. But if we were to give them the benefit of the doubt and to say that their reluctance or refusal to adopt the phrase institutional racism when speaking about their own services is at least in good faith, intended in good faith, and I know that's a big if, particularly given what we've heard, then what would you say directly to him, if you could? What would you say directly to him to help? You know? You say, no, listen, I think I understand why you're reluctant to use the phrase institutional racism to describe your institutionally racist police force, but here's some help. What would you say directly to him? Because I don't know if you can. I mean, you must be. What would you say? Why it's important, or to remove that mental block or that sense of misplaced loyalty to office? I don't know. What would you say? 10:51 is the time. Sal's in Paddington. Sal, that's not the question you rang in to answer, so don't feel under any pressure at all to answer.
I'm more than happy to, because it ties into the last time that we had a conversation when we were talking about Delilah, and we were talking about how people take an attack on on groupthink as a personal attack. And more than that, if you remember, I told you the phrase temporal semiotic drift.
I do remember.
And he is accusing that phrase of having undergone it, which is why he doesn't want to use it.
You may need to simplify your contribution slightly if you want to be part of a viral clip.
That's fine. If we take that what he says in good faith,
yes,
it is because he has taken two perspectives on this. His personal perspective as to whether he believes he is racist or not, but also
of course,
the view of him as a leader of that police force, which is very tied to how he thinks of himself and his own identity. So as far as he's concerned, he's done his due diligence. But
so he can't separate criticism of the institution from criticism of the individual?
Because he is, in effect, due to his role...
He is the embodiment of the institution.
He is basically the avatar of that thing. But what he's failed to do is to, the third point that actually gives us perspective and depth is an external point of view, which is
the independent report.
Denying.
Yeah, exactly.
Precisely.
Gosh.
And that's why you need those 3 points, because otherwise you're getting a two-dimensional point of view on a three-dimensional problem.
Wow. I mean, I don't want to upset the last caller, but he said he was going to come up with a really simple analysis of what's gone wrong here, and yours is simpler. Or at least it's easier for me to understand. That's really straightforward.
You can tell that he genuinely does believe that there are issues.
Yes.
But he doesn't believe that they are systemic, and that he doesn't see it being a problem. But he does acknowledge the problem happens in other police forces.
And in some cases.
You get the Brexit.
Yeah, no, yes. You're right. So in simple terms, just run through 1 to 3 for me. Give me the sort of chapter titles. When you said there's 3 points.
As in the 3 points of perspective.
Yeah.
You need the individual. Have I committed racism? Am I a contributing factor? Because he himself is an avatar or...
No, I understand that. Well, just move. Yeah. I'm just getting it for my notes so that I can pass off this as my own thinking at a later date. So
that's fine.
What's the second one?
Ghostwrite that book.
Individual. I wish someone would.
Yeah, individual.
Yeah.
The group identity,
right?
Which is
yes.
But you need the external.
And then the external scrutiny, the external point of view. So he's caught up in all 3 of those. He takes criticism of the institution as being a criticism of him. The group identity sees him become the embodiment of the group by dint of being the head of it. And the rejection of external scrutiny means that the chances of undoing the problems caused by the first 2 issues are nil.
Because he can't see it, because he doesn't recognise the fact that they exist, because from his limited perspective, because he can't see it, but worse than that, he's denying the fact that it exists because he can't see it, and is denying the fact that other people may be able to see what he can't.
As a consequence of the group identity. It might be Thursday, but it's not 12 o'clock yet, Sal, so I can't give you a round of applause. I'll give you a metaphorical one, if I may. There you go. 10, I'm going to crack on, mate. I want to squeeze in some other people if I can. Very quickly, this text is powerful, therefore we should read it. I've recently left the Met, James, after 11 years, joined to help people in their hour of need, whatever that may be. Once the sheen of the police slips, after about 4 to 5 years, the true state of your working environment begins to show. I found myself becoming a fundamentally different person as a direct result of that environment. Missing birthdays, Christmas, sporting events, also the development of PTSD from witnessing truly horrific scenes are all aspects of the job that one must accept when one joins that world. But the nastiness, the toxicity, the bitterness and the bullying in all forms is not. I left as a direct result of this toxicity, and only 6 months later the Casey report was published. I question now if I was somewhat blind at the time, and the reasons why I left were ultimately reflected in the findings of the report. If that is the case, it's a somewhat bittersweet ending for me. Bitter in the sense that I found myself unemployed for a number of months and the financial implications of that, but sweet in the sense that I had unknowingly stayed true to my own moral fabric and left a place that fundamentally goes against my personal integrity. Perhaps I should be a copper after all, but that ship has well and truly sunk. 10:57 is the time. Colette is in Enfield. Colette, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
I was the individual who asked that question of the Commissioner yesterday.
Oh, okay. What did you think of the answer?
I was horrified. I couldn't believe what I was saying and what he was saying.
No, exactly.
Sorry, I
often can't believe what I'm saying, but I know you didn't mean that.
I'm so nervous talking
stop
to
it.
you.
Don't be ridiculous.
I can't put words in the correct order.
Nonsense.
I was horrified by what I was hearing. And then I double-checked myself, because here was this man who was speaking English and in a perfect way, who had this sense of authority, and he knew his force like the back of his hand. And I thought, it's something to do with me. I got it completely wrong.
Yeah,
I'm a black woman from North London. I was born here. I've been in education for 40 years, and I'm thinking, you've got it wrong, Colette. But you asked a question a minute ago, which was, how do we challenge him? What do we need to share with him to get him to pull back from that position that it doesn't exist? And I would ask him, how can he explain child Q? And I remember my horror, once again, about a child being strip searched with no adult in that room with her that was being an advocate for her. I question the facts. We have years of data about young black boys being stopped disproportionately to their peers. We have the adultification of black children. Yeah. And I would ask him, how does he explain that away to me in a way that would dismiss the concept of institutional racism?
And he would not be able to, and therefore the door would be ajar to his acceptance of the relevance and the necessity of the phrase in his contemplation of these issues.
Yep.
I think you're probably right. I think
the black community keeps saying over and over again, for me, decades worth of evidence and facts, and we are told, no, dear, go away, you've got it wrong.
I think this is why Baroness Lawrence was so outspoken yesterday, but as she kept referencing the 30-year anniversary of Stephen's murder, 25th anniversary of Macpherson, and you've got senior police officers now queuing up to say on the media that they don't accept the description of institutional racism. It's pretty grim when you think of it. It's gross when you think of it like that.
It's scary, and therefore, how on earth do you expect me to believe that you can make relevant changes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll pass it on, actually, if I ever get the opportunity. How when you speak like that, Chief Constable, how do you expect the people on the receiving end of the realities of the racism that is under review to believe that you're invested in repairing anything? And we'll finish where we started, thanks to Colette, which is with the very simple observation: you can't fix a problem if you're not admitting that the problem exists. It's 11 o'clock. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Thank you for all the nice comments about that last hour. Very important conversation, which I feel my contribution to it was rather minimal, which is as it should be on a good day. It will be less than minimal on this, because I'm getting rather tired of seeing my ships come in when it comes to analysis of major news issues. But there was some research published yesterday that described a fear of nanny statism as being behind the failure of every UK government of the last 30 years to tackle the obesity crisis. It's incredible, right? I mean, you may think I over-egg the pudding when it comes to secretly funded lobby groups masquerading as think tanks and seeking to influence not just public discourse, but of course, government policy as well. It was, I mean, you know the names of them all. They don't all reside on Tufton Street, but they all reside within a very small orbit, and they are dedicated to promoting the interests of wealth. They dress it up as ideological. It's not ideological. Oh, we believe in the market. The market will regulate everything. That simply means if you let rich people do whatever the hell they want, everyone else will actually benefit, which is so obviously stupid that they have to set up organisations with fancy names like the Institute of Wizard Wheezes or the Cool Dudes Alliance or whatever it may be. They can't possibly stand up and say publicly over and over again, you must let rich people and businesses do whatever the hell they like, and down with health and safety legislation, trade unions and worker protections and pay, down with pay. They've got the Daily Mail to do that for them. But that is why these institutions and alliances and and so-called think tanks exist. And of course, if you want to understand their position on any given issue, and don't forget that people like Liz Truss are not just sort of allied with, but they're embedded in places like the Institute of Economic Affairs, for example. If you want a giggle, have a look at the time they tried to take me to Ofcom over my description of them as a bunch of Herberts. That will make you smile. If it doesn't, you're made of stone. But Liz Truss she doesn't just turn up for tea there. The relationship is I mean, almost inextricable. And when their economic policies actually get a run out in Downing Street, well, you know what happens. You saw what happened with Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget. The head of the Taxpayers Alliance gets a full page in one newspaper today. I actually can't remember which one, but if my life depended on it, I'd say it was the Daily Mail. I don't even know what he's arguing, but why is he there? What qualification process do you go through to get a full page in the? Oh, well, he's the head of the Taxpayers Alliance. Yes, but what does that mean? That's just somebody rich setting up something with a fancy name, and then all the people that work there being treated as if they're part of academic institutions by the British media. It makes no sense until you understand why it happens. And it happens because you have to infiltrate public discourse in order to infiltrate government policy. And if you want to represent the interests of wealth, capital, big business, investors, shareholders, then you're going to need to work pretty flipping hard to skew the playing field, to make the playing field less level. And that's how we end up where we are today. Also, the phrase think tank is deeply unhelpful because it also applies to perfectly transparent organisations who are populated by academically qualified and authoritative experts and whose wages are paid by individuals whose identity is known and easy to see. And they labour under the same label, the poor souls, think tank. But that's the world that we've built. That's the country we've created. And have a look at the relationships between politicians and pundits and some of these think tanks as well. You show me a hard right politician or pundit, and if they haven't got a fellowship or a chairmanship or a neat little side hustle with one of these so-called think tanks, I'll show you a mug. I can't actually, off the top of my head, think of anyone who hasn't got some sort of association of that ilk. So when you see the phrase nanny statism in the context of the country having a £6.5 billion a year problem with obesity, I'll say that again because you know how much the junior doctors are looking for. £6.5 billion a year problem with obesity. You have to work out, you have to try and think, well, why? If they really care about taxpayers, these people, then surely they should be in favour of the government spending money on reducing the £6.5 billion a year bill that obesity has been producing for the country. I thought they cared about. Oh, they don't. I see. They care about the people selling the stuff that's making everyone fat. That's why they're opposed to sugar taxes or salt taxes. That's why they're opposed to limits on advertising or. I see. They say they're libertarians, but they're not, because a choice can't be free if Keith Kohler is spending £1 billion a year on billboards while we're spending 20 pence a decade on encouraging people to drink more water. How is that freedom of choice? That's not libertarian. That's authoritarian. So that, I mean, if I had to pick one thing to fix in the context of media and politics, not in the context of poverty and obviously, you know, you'd wave your magic wand and make sure everybody had enough to live on, everybody had enough to maintain some dignity. But if I could change anything about the relationship between media and politics in our broken country, it would be the proliferation and promotion of entirely unqualified individuals under the umbrella of entirely spurious or invented institutions who are wheeled onto LBC and the BBC and ITV. Half of them have got newspaper columns. They don't just get quoted in articles, they've actually got columns. Because look, if you owned a newspaper, right, you had a few billion quid in the bank, even if some of it was now making its way towards Dominion voting systems. If you had a few £100 million in the bank, right, and obviously your empire isn't confined to newspapers, you've got a massive investment in all sorts of areas where fossil fuels, perhaps, for example, or food production, or you might have shares in Keith's Cola. You've got all of this. How are you going to feel about the suggestion that perhaps you could find room in your newspaper for a columnist who is poo-pooing the idea that governments should be doing more to make people healthier, eh? Oh, I like that. That's a great idea. Sign him up. Who have you got? Can we get someone really to write a column about why we should actually be actively encouraging a £6.5 billion a year bill for people with obesity? Yeah, just don't mention the fact that taxpayers pay it. Oh, you're a genius. Have a column. And they've all got one. Sunday Times. Everywhere you turn, these people have got columns with their links to the think tanks. So, the one place it worked, oddly, was smoking. But if you look back over that story, have a look for who was resisting it. Have a look at the organisations or individuals that profess to have a problem with the smoking ban for libertarian reasons. And then see if you can work out whether any of them ever took money from the tobacco industry. And if you can't work out whether any of them ever took money from the tobacco industry, it might be because they never tell you where they take their money from. So you are entitled to wonder whether. That's very odd. You say you're smoking, but it's an infringement of personal liberty, is it? Okay. How do you feel about people's personal liberty to walk out into the middle of the M20? Well, that harms others. Well, so does smoking, mate. So surely we should be in favour of people's rights to walk out into the middle of the M25 and get hit by a judge. No, well, that's not the same at all. Why not? Well, I don't make any money out of that. People funding my think tank don't make any money out of that kind of danger, that kind of hazard, that kind of harm. We only make money out of selling people stuff that makes them sick, fat, poorly, or die young. So there's probably no topic here now, is there? I've answered all the questions that I was about to ask before I've even got around to asking them. 30 years, failure to tackle the obesity crisis. Labour and Conservative governments, so this is a rare opportunity to put the boot into both of them, despite the fact that one's not been anywhere near power for 13 years. Labour and Conservative governments have both displayed a similar reluctance to get too closely involved in a subject widely seen as a minefield. Why is it seen as a minefield? Because the minute you announce any intention to improve the lives, the health and the life expectancy of ordinary people weaned upon a diet of cola cubes and chicken nuggets, you get accused of being part of the nanny state, even by people like Jacob Rees-Mogg who've still got an actual nanny. So, what appetite, if you pardon the pun, does this feed? Is the question that I'm interested in. What is the... Colin reminds us that the word libertarian is probably the most misused in the country. If they were really libertarian, they'd be furious about the Home Office's treatment of migrants and refugees. They'd be arguing that doctors don't need degrees or certificates. Libertarianism in full effect is bonkers. These are simply horribly biased people, terrified of losing their immense privilege. And then, of course, you get the political wing of these think tanks springing up and saying things like, oh, you just need to eat less and exercise more, or we need less carrot and more stick, or we need to fat shame people. People actually say that. Prominent, we need to fat shame people. And fat shaming might work for some people. I used to do it a lot on this programme, and it's probably my deepest regret, actually, of the stuff I did on air in a different time when I was a slightly different person, fat shaming. And we'd get the odd call from someone who'd say, well, I decided to go on a diet when I went on holiday and I broke the deck chair, or I got stuck in a patio chair. I used to think it was funny. And I was wrong. But this mission to poo-poo and undermine any government role in addressing obesity is among the stupidest phenomena of our time. And I don't mean that from health, because if you're callous, if you're from the Suella Braverman School of Humanitarianism, and you don't really give a fig about anybody, then I can make it about money. I don't care if so-and-so gets diabetes or drinks himself to death on Keith's Cola. I don't care if someone is living on chips. Why should I care? I'm fine. I don't care. I don't need government advice. Me. And also down with refugees. If you're like that, then let's make it about the money. 6.5 billion quid a year. How much would you have to spend to bring down obesity exponentially? Nowhere near £6.5 billion a year. There have been 14 strategies and 689 policies since 1992, as well as the creation and abolition of 14 different bodies to oversee progress. We now have the third highest rate of obesity in Europe. We're behind Malta and Turkey. And they have come up with fear of nanny statism. I don't know if there has ever been a more ringing endorsement of my very lonely mission to explain why treating these so-called think tanks like valid contributors to public discourse is a deeply, deeply dangerous thing to do. Deeply dangerous. Has there ever been a better proof of it? The idea that ministers are terrified of being accused of nanny statism. Who's going to accuse them of nanny statism? Step forward, the Tufton Street Mafia. And who do they speak for? Don't know. They won't tell us who pays their wages. And that's now passes for normal in Brexit. That's perfectly normal. Perfect. Don't know who pays their wages, but we're so terrified of what they say that we're actually going to rewrite government policy accordingly. I'm worried again now that I've turned this into a non-topic by being so clearly correct about everything. It's becoming a bit of an occupational hazard on the programme there. I'm joking, by the way. I need a little winking emoji sometimes, don't I? So, what works? So if you've had 14 strategies, 689 policies and 14 bodies created and later abolished to oversee progress in addressing obesity, what works? And that becomes a question that you only get to ask once you've diffused the influence of these toxic lobby groups masquerading as think tanks. What works? How do you defuse them? Because no one's going to stop inviting them on. I've tried that. I've had conversations with colleagues even, let alone other people. Don't invite them on unless they tell you who funds them. It's not difficult to do. Why would you be taking their opinion on something like a sugar tax if you don't know what relationship they have with the junk food industry? Oh, well, James, they get the conversation going. It's good for debate. And it's... Yeah, right. So that's not going to work. £6.5 billion a year on dealing with obesity-related medical and health issues. What's going to work? Just straight up. You tell me what is going to bring that bill down. But the other thing I'd like you to do, and I'm not very good at this, because I just don't feel it at all. I think perhaps I used to. But why does it work? Why does it work among ordinary people? The callers I'd get to my programme who, without being rude, they weren't the deepest thinkers, but they would say, eat less and exercise more. And you'd be like, well, that's so obvious. And it's not working, so we obviously need to do something else. What does it appeal to, the nanny state argument, in you? So I pop up and say, we need to spend, if we spend £500,000 a year on this, we'll save £3 billion a year for the NHS. In most circumstances, you'd think, crikey, where do I sign? But then someone on the other side pops up and says, oh, it's nanny statism gone mad. It's nanny statism gone mad. Why does it work? So 2 questions. Number 1, how do you reduce that figure of £6.5 billion a year? And number 2, why is nanny statism such a powerful rhetorical tool when, without sounding ridiculous or betraying my public school roots too completely, it'd be great to have a nanny. They warm up your slippers, could make you a hot chocolate before you go to bed, make sure your bedding's clean. Wouldn't you like to have a nanny? Well, why is nanny state a toxic phrase? 0345 6060 973. And what would you do to bring down that figure? It's quite a long and meandering introduction, that, even by my standards, which means I can probably say with even more confidence than usual that if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 23 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Many broadcasters are obviously more focused on controversial clickbaiting programmes that attract attention and revenue, says Julie in Suffolk. Well, it falls to me to remind you, Julie, that this is currently, what goes up must come down. This is currently the most popular talk show on the whole of commercial radio in the United Kingdom. So I can dispute your conclusion. Maybe it's easier to get bums on seats by being deliberately provocative and thoughtless and shallow, and attacking fat people, like I used to do. But feel the rating. So that might be part of it. But how do you get the number down? The £6.5 billion a year spent on obesity-related conditions, and crucially, this think tank-driven nonsense about the nanny state, blamed by Institute for Government Research, blamed by them for the failure of countless strategies and bodies to actually get a proper handle on this issue. How do you diffuse that, and why is it so effective? Matthew's in Shepperton. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. If you'll permit me to be slightly tinfoil-hatted, I feel like the nanny state conversation is a bit of a distraction that they would actually like us to spend our time arguing about. Oh. Because I've said before to your colleagues on here that I think the biggest driver behind the obesity crisis is we work too hard. Too much work, too many hours, too much snacking and not, preparing meals properly. All the rest of it means bad diet, bad exercise, and not enough sleep.
I'm sure there's some truth in that, but we have to legislate as politicians. We have to legislate for the world we inhabit. It's for the sort of philosophers, perhaps, to posit, as Daniel Chandler did rather beautifully on yesterday's programme, to positive an alternative reality, to actually the systemic and fundamental changes to society that could improve that. But I've got to come up with something that's going to cut that bill next year. So I have to legislate for the world in which I currently live.
Well, I guess what I'm linking it straight to that. What I'm saying is that the government doesn't want to have to face the reality that you might have to slow the economy down and give us a chance to be healthier in order to reduce that $6.5 billion. It could well be that giving people a break, letting them do 4-day weeks, that kind of thing, would.
It's obviously a hobby horse of yours if you find other people about it. But obesity is an enormous problem, at risk of stereotyping, among people who don't do much.
I don't have sort of figures to talk about that. In my perception, the problem is
you don't really need figures. You don't really need figures. Most of us would acknowledge we probably don't do enough exercise, don't pay quite as much attention as we should to our diet, don't have the knowledge and the information that we need to make informed decisions. But none of that is necessarily improved by. A 4-day week is a popular hobby horse and an attractive idea, but here are people lined up on a sofa watching telly. They're not at work. They're eating pizza and crisps. How do we make them less obese? How do we address their obesity?
Well, I think the bit you've described is the part where you really do have to do something about the food supply and advertising.
What do we do? That's what I'm looking for. What do you think works? The smoking ban worked. The smoking advertising campaign worked. That's worked beautifully, actually, albeit that because these things are like flipping cockroaches, the vaping industry has sprung up as a consequence, but that could be clamped down as well if there was a will for it. What would it look like?
Well, to answer your question directly, it has to be, I think, about not letting this stuff affect kids. So the way things are marketed, the way diets are formed, the way tastes are laid down. Like I've got a young child and I've been reading about this. They say don't give them salt because they'll develop a taste for it and then they're stuck with it. Yeah. And all this stuff is marketed at kids. You've got sweets at the checkout, blah blah blah. I think probably
so little things like this. There's stuff that Jamie has worked so hard on and which he gets routinely attacked for. I'd love to know what kind of investments newspaper owners have in the other areas, or is it just to sort of create an attempt to create an atmosphere of criticism for anybody suggesting spending government money on preventing people from spending their own money on stuff that is very, very bad for them? It is a real conundrum. Thank you, Matthew. Craig's in Runcorn. Craig, what do you reckon?
Hello, James. I'm actually a physiotherapy student. I'm doing an assignment on.
Do you want to have a look at my knee
at the moment? Yeah, no problem. That's funny enough what I am doing. I'm doing osteoarthritis and obese patients.
Oh, well, I'm not obese, but I've definitely got a dodgy knee. What made you pick up the phone? What do you want to say?
So I think one of the largest problems is obesity is massively misunderstood.
Yes.
It's not just fat, lazy people that can't control their diet.
Absolutely
These
right.
people,
of course.
They are predispositioned to actually withhold fat.
Yes.
You know,
you put two people on an identical diet and they're going to end up, and identical exercise regimes even, and they're going to end up different after 6 months.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly that, yeah. The actual evidence, the scientific evidence is in treating obesity is based around a multidisciplinary team.
Of course. You
need somebody that can address the diet issue, address the psychological factors, and also prescribe proper exercise and education as well. We're educating around the condition and how to manage it. With regards to having a nanny state on that, that's something you need to consider is the fact that these people are likely to be quite depressed, have low self-esteem. You can't force them to do something. Most of them probably do want to change. They don't know how, and quite often they'll go to the GP.
But that's why nanny state should be quite a helpful phrase, because it's someone looking after you. Do you know what I mean? It's not drill sergeant state. It's not. It's not PE teacher state. It's not someone shouting at you to get your knees up off the floor. Come on, O'Brien. It's nanny. It's nanny saying, "Come on, you can do better than that." Or come, let me just explain to you why you don't need to do this. Or have you thought of doing that instead? Or maybe it isn't. Maybe it is the sort of Jacob Rees-Mogg definition of nanny, when you're getting your knees, getting your thighs slapped all the time and sent to your room.
But I think that's part of the issue, is that perception of what a nanny state is.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think a lot of people do perceive it as being that drill sergeant. You're being told what to do. And people don't like being told what to do.
Even when someone like Jamie Oliver does it in such a careful and sensitive way, he gets portrayed as having been ordering people to put down their turkey twizzlers like some sort of fascist diet police. And what all he's trying to do is, thanks to what he knows, he's trying to help people's children live longer, and then the parents get cross with him for it. How can we fix that, Craig?
Yeah, exactly. You've got people's best interests at heart, haven't you?
Yes.
Why are you getting shut down for trying to help people at the end of the day? I think...
Well, answer the question. Why are you getting shut down for trying to help? Because this is going to be your career in a way, albeit that you'll be, initially at least, doing it on a more individual than institutional basis. Why would someone come along and say, I don't need flipping out, I just need to eat less and exercise more? It's not a job, Craig. It's not a career, mate. It's straightforward, isn't it? Where does that impulse come from? That impulse to poo-poo the bigger picture or the smaller picture of what you're going to be doing? It's weird.
It is. I think some people don't. When you try and put it in a very simplistic way like that, it's something that's complicated. So I think the natural reaction is to go, well, it's not that easy, actually, because it's not. And there's many factors to it.
Definitely.
You know, it's a growing pandemic all over the world.
Yeah, except it is one of the few areas where we're in the lead, you know, third behind Turkey and Malta across the whole of Europe, which is something about the diet in Malta somebody once told me, which I struggled to believe, and then I looked it up and it turned out to be true, but I can't remember the details at the moment. Thank you, Craig. That is the thing that interests me most. Why does this work? There's two reasons, is there, psychologically? Number one, nobody tells me what to do. That's the sort of nobody puts baby in the corner school of public discourse. You sort of appeal to people's sense of, I don't know what that is that you're appealing to, but you know what I'm describing. Nobody tells me what to do. And then you've got the other end of it, which is, well, hang on a minute, I'm fine. Why should my taxes go on helping people who aren't? Is there anything else to describe this sort of mindset, this anti-nanny state mindset? 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. 11:36 is the time. That report into the allegedly bullying behaviour of Dominic Raab is, I think, might be with the Prime Minister by now. Certainly we were reading reports not long ago that it was going to be with him by 11:30. You'll remember that staff he has worked with accused him of repeatedly reducing them to tears, ruining people's lives, engaging in coercive behaviour. Sky News, I don't want to say led the line on this, but I found their reports, particularly the ones by Molly Malone, especially informative and helpful. I'll just retweet one of those for you if you want to bring yourself up to speed. It's from Beth Rigby's account, the political editor over at Sky. But of course, it is in Rishi Sunak's gift now to decide what happens, and that will depend partly, at least, on what is in the report. So I don't think it will happen on our watch, actually. I can't imagine Sunak's going to process the contents and announce a response before 1 o'clock if he's only getting it around 11:30. But I could be wrong. I sometimes am. So much money to be made in ultra-processed food, high sugar, high salt, anything that the more processing you do, the cheaper it becomes for some reason that I don't fully understand. So how do you stop people ending up obese? Well, you stop people making enormous profits out of making them obese. And that, of course, flies in the face of much of modern conservatism and all of Tufton Street vampirism. Is it that simple? 11:37 is the time. 0345 6060 973. Is it that simple? If you could get rid... I'll read you what they say. Interviewers told us that politicians worry that bossily telling people what to eat would make them unpopular. That's the politicians become unpopular, a fear strongly reinforced by some parts of the media. Hey, Thatcher, milk snatcher, one of my kids heard about the other day in a history class. And that wasn't telling people what to eat, that was robbing them of stuff that they had previously been consuming. So you could imagine it sticking. That plus the belief that people should be free to eat whatever they want helps to explain why ministers of both Labour and Conservative parties have found it much more comfortable to emphasise individual responsibility than systemic interventions. 3 words, seatbelts and cigarettes. Why are they different? Tony's in Aldershot. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Just say, lovely show. Absolutely love it.
Thank
anyway.
I feel it's a bit below par today. I'd probably only give myself a 6.5, a 7 out of 10 today, actually.
No, not at all.
You're very kind. You're very kind. Carry on. Let's see if you can raise the score.
Let's see. I am a triathlete.
Right.
I got COVID. I used to do a lot of races. I did the London Marathon. To put it into perspective, I used to run half marathons every week.
Wow.
I used to run 6 days a week.
Blimey.
Now, at that time, if you put me in a lineup against from the thinnest to the fattest, you would not choose me as a triathlete because I was overweight.
Okay.
Now, when I got long COVID, I put on about 7 stone and I was not able to exercise because it was just so much. Luckily, I have an absolutely fantastic GP. I have an absolutely fantastic diabetes nurse because, of course, being overweight, I got diabetes too. I got non-fat liver disease because of the weight I put on. So I now have lost 6.5 stone with the help and support of the GP, my diabetes nurse. And I also have an injection every week which suppresses my hunger.
Okay. And that's all on the NHS?
Now, I was directed before to NHS app where the government say, this is through the NHS that I've done this.
Good.
But I've had to change... But
hang on, you need to read. Oi, stop talking. Oi.
The government say use the NHS app.
This is insane.
Healthily.
I think you've got your phone upside down. Can you hear me? What's happening now? Stop! You just swore. We had to dump what you said, Tony.
Yes,
no, stop talking. You just swore, so we had to dump what you said.
Hello?
No, something's gone very wrong with Tony's phone. I think she's got it upside down. I think she's talking into the earpiece. And that's why she can't hear me coming out of the... talking. Yeah, that's why. See what's going on. I want to get to the bottom of that story. We had to dump what she said because she used a slightly inappropriate Anglo-Saxon word to describe what she was eating, as opposed to, sugar or something like that. So that's all. No biggie. We'll get her back. But there's something... There are a few experiences in the studio stranger than talking to someone. Like, I interrupt a lot, right? You recognise that. I've probably. I interrupt too much. It's probably the thing that would most improve the programme for you would be if I managed to interrupt a little bit less. But when I start interrupting someone and they can't hear me at all, it makes no difference. It's actually quite frightening. I forget momentarily that Keith can press a button and we won't be able to hear them anymore. I think I'm going to be stuck here forever, like a weird episode of The Twilight Zone. And Tony's never going to stop talking. She's never going to hang up, and I'm never going to be able to interrupt her. Tony, don't use rude words.
I am so sorry.
Oh, now the dog's here now. Oh, God. We upset the dog. We set the dog. Is that what is the dumb button, like a silent dog whistle alarm? Something's gone off coming out. I don't know what to do.
I'm so so sorry.
That's all right.
I apologise profusely.
Okay.
I am so sorry.
That's fine. No one heard except me, but it's discombobulated me now, and then I couldn't interrupt you because I don't know what had happened. I
don't know. I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. I apologise.
I could hear you. That was the problem. I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn you down or off. It's ridiculous. Where were we?
Where were so? Sorry, let me be quiet, my dog. So where were we? So yes, I've lost the weight, and I was
and it
told,
worked. So you're coming in from many angles, but you needed help, support, and guidance.
Yeah.
I think.
And the government, and through the NHS, you're meant to. They say go through the NHS healthy start. The only thing is, and this then goes down, especially for people who are struggling at the moment with the cost of living, they cannot afford fresh fruit. There is very rare fresh fruit it's rare now.
Yeah.
You cannot hardly get eggs, which also that is good. But people tend to go now for the processed food because it is cheaper.
Yes, of course.
And you've got all these diets, and you've got all these. Go and get fit. Now, for someone who's obese, who has body dysmorphia like me, I don't like going outside and showing people me running. I know that sounds like weird because I'm a triathlete, but I suffer with my mental health.
Yeah,
and
I
run on a treadmill because I don't want people thinking, oh, look at that fat person.
So glad you said person then, Tony. You got me worried with your potty mouth.
And the thing is, the government don't make it easy for someone who wants to lose weight.
And the reason is that they don't want to be accused of nanny statism. So what you're describing is the need to have an arm put around you, really, for guidance and support, for help, for understanding.
Oh, definitely.
And then you have at the other end of it, there are arguments for bringing in legislation or some form of taxation on the really unhealthy stuff, because if it, or somehow making the good stuff cheaper or the bad stuff more expensive, cost of living notwithstanding, that's the only way that you're going to change people's habits, isn't it? Is by helping them a lot.
And it is. I mean, you can, someone with body dysmorphia, you can. On some NHS trusts, you go and have counselling, but the trouble is that counselling only lasts for 12 weeks.
Yeah.
You then have to wait 6 months until you can reapply, and then you can go on the waiting list, and then you can have another 12 weeks. And some people need longer than 12 weeks.
Of course, and some people won't need 12 weeks. But and some people will not be benefited in the long run because we're all different and we're all human. But the bottom line is, whatever you spend is going to be less than the £6.5 billion a year you're going to be spending if everyone carries on as they are on their current trajectory and doesn't make any effort whatsoever, any government-aided effort to improve things at all.
Oh, gosh, definitely. We need the support. There are people, we need the support. My personal...
I know. I hear it. No, I get it.
I couldn't have done it without the support that I've had.
And there it is.
That is, though, down to the staff of the NHS. I am so lucky that I have got a fantastic GP.
Yes, and I think there's always been an element of luck in how good your GP is or your dentist, but my goodness me, it's never been truer today, never been truer than it is today. Tony, guess what? I just got a text and it said you've jumped to a solid 8 after this call.
There you go.
So you've done it. You've pushed us up from a 6.5 to an 8 out of 10. A mystery house still to come. What a time to be alive. Tony, have a great day.
You have a fantastic day.
Thank you. Go give the dog a little run around. 11:45 is the time. It's always interesting to work out where phrases come from, and I'm just trying to find out now. You can tell by the tippity-tappeting of my keyboard. I should have done this before, where the term nanny state comes from. It's a term of British origin, no surprise there. Conveys a view that a government are overprotective or interfering unduly. Where do we come from? An early Tory MP, you couldn't make it up. Spectator magazine, which is also where the term virtue signalling first appeared. And they boast about it, these people. Spectator, of course, chaired by that famously impartial political journalist Andrew Neil, spent years at the BBC while being scrupulously impartial and somehow simultaneously publishing The Spectator or chairing the Spectator magazine. Bernard Levin, Auburn War, and Margaret Thatcher were credited with having popularised it. You could not make it up. You really couldn't. And, well, I didn't. So there's also, speaking of the Spectator magazine, Suella Braverman's got a piece in it today where she talks about how she was listening to a radio phone-in last week when people were discussing whether or not her ethnicity, well, she doesn't actually put it like this. Possibly she didn't understand what she was listening to, but we were responding to Saeed Avarsi's description of Braverman's rhetoric as racist, and also Saeed Avarsi, who I'd remind you is a former chair of the Conservative Party and currently a peer in the House of Lords, having been put there by David Cameron. So we were discussing the alleged racism of her rhetoric. Pretty clear that almost every caller, if not every caller, actually completely agreed. But also, of course, the problem that people like me have with a form of, it's not white privilege, I don't know what it is, but a reluctance to call out what you see to be racism when it's being indulged in by a member of an ethnic minority. And a lot of callers suggested, and in fact Saeed Avarsi, I think, agreed, that is... that could well be deliberate, as you get to bring in policies that are obviously disgusting and racist, or at least you get to deploy language that is racist, and you can't really you won't be accused of racism in quite the same way because you are yourself a member of an ethnic minority. So apparently Sue Ellen was listening to this, and she nearly rang in, but didn't. It's funny that. She rang the show, but it goes to a different school. That doesn't quite work. And she was going to quote her hero, Margaret Thatcher, and say that when you can't criticise people's policies, you end up attacking them as individuals, which is a remarkable conclusion to have drawn if indeed it was this programme that she was listening to, because we were attacking her policies and indeed her language. It's the racism that is rhetoric. Saeed Avarsi called her a Trump tribute act, but she doesn't need to ring this show to talk to Saeed Avarsi. She could just go to Conservative Party conference or just pop over the corridor to the House of Lords. But we were attacking language and policy, not individual. So you're a liar, Home Secretary, as well as someone who routinely indulges in racist rhetoric. It's 11:53. You've got 7 minutes to ring in. Get an aide to show you how to use a phone. Come on, let's do it. Let's talk. Why would you be listening last week and not listening today? Let's do it. Let's have the chat. Let's do it now. You can call yourself Margaret in Ferrum if you want. That was a hilarious joke in The Spectator that you used today. I'll explain to you why. An attack upon your language and an attack upon your policies is not an attack upon you as a person. So even when you're quoting Margaret Thatcher in defence of your despicable positions, you're completely misrepresenting what she said and what she stood for. Unless she's masquerading as Brian in Wigan, the Home Secretary is not currently on the line.
Lost my speakerphone, it's right next to my ear.
Who's that talking there in the background? What happened then? What? Why can I hear him? It's all going wrong today. Is that your fault, Keith? I got worried then, thought it might be Suella Braverman. Keep one phone line free at least, because she nearly rang in. I'll set him straight. She's like a Twitter troll. I'll ring in. Oh, they won't let me on because I'll show him what's what. Come on then. Come on. It's Mystery Hour in 6 minutes. You haven't got... Tom in Cardiff, I need to warn you, I may have to cut you off in your prime when the Home Secretary rings in to set me straight about why I'm only attacking her because I can't attack her policies or her language. So be warned, Tom. Take it away.
That's all right, James.
Carry on.
That's all right. Okay, so my point is that I think the best way to tackle obesity would be some kind of voucher system where people can have vouchers to do some kind of leisure activity, so a martial art, a group sport, the gym.
So you're addressing the cost of it, aren't you?
I am, yeah, James, because
I think it needs to start soon. You've got to get the appetite there. You've got to. I mean, you're right, particularly with young people, giving them the opportunity to do something that might be prohibitively expensive could set them up for life. But where we are now, it's me. You've got to persuade me. I can afford to do it, but I don't. I do actually. I'll play the role.
Sorry, James. So what I know is that when I'm in training, when I'm doing well physically, I make healthier choices because it's part of a lifestyle. And I know that when I fall out of training, when I get an injury, when things like that happen, I end up eating rubbish and I end up sitting around.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that not only would these kind of leisure vouchers aid the obesity crisis, it would also help with mental health crisis as well. Because what I know is I'm a mental health professional.
Yes.
I speak to people all day, every day. And a lot of the time, there's not many sort of social activities going on. and that leads to a negative impact on their overall well-being.
And what you've reminded me of, actually, is that this is not one of those conversations where we're going to find the golden ticket, is it? You're going to need lots of different things. So what would help you would not necessarily help me, but it would help you. And what would help me, because you don't really need encouragement to get out and exercise and do stuff, is not going to help you.
No, that's right.
So, so the bigger the nanny state, the better the chances are of helping more people.
Yeah, cast your net wide, James. Cast your net wide and see who we help.
I think you're right, and yet this reluctance to be seen to be telling people what to do, it doesn't seem to apply to many other areas of life, does it? With this accusation of nanny state, but we all know where it comes from. We just don't know where, and now we know where it leads. It leads to £6.5 billion worth a year of largely avoidable costs to the NHS. Tom, take care. Helena is in Camden. Helena, what would you like to say?
Kalimera, είσαι καλά?
Καλά. Και εσύ? Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Helena. I say Helena now, don't I? Now I know you're Greek. Helena.
No. It is actually Elena.
Oh, Elena. Signomi.
Anyway,
Ella.
Anyway, I haven't got any answers, James. It's
what are you doing here? Τι θέλεις?
Signomi. So it's more of a kind of cultural observation.
Yeah.
I have lived in London most of my life, but I have lived back home a couple of times, and I've got 4 children, and it's kind of an observation. When my children were younger and I was a mother, it's surprising how I noticed that Indian children eat Indian food, Chinese children will eat Chinese food, and blah blah blah. And the Italians, obviously, and the Greeks eat. But when I used to go out with my friends, they used to sort of, I don't know, either buy their kids chicken nuggets and chips when we were in restaurants, or buy the kiddie meals, and I used to sit there looking really perplexed, and they go, oh, they don't eat that food, and I just thought, well, if they didn't know any better, wouldn't they just eat? I mean, my kids will eat Greek salad, they'll eat black-eyed. They'd eat you, actually, if you stood still long enough. And my boys are in the late 20s and 30s and strapping. So
there is something going on here. And I don't think turkey twizzlers are a thing in many other European countries, certainly not southern European countries. So, again, it is as if... It's as if the dealers have created the reality, and in that reality, everyone's addicted to the stuff that they're dealing. No one ever actually stops to wonder whether or not we could just remove the product from the supermarkets entirely, or put restrictions in place. Because I think that if I took your boys when they were little, and albeit that they really like Greek salad or a nice stifado or some souvlaki, and I actually put piles of chicken nuggets in front of them, I reckon I could wean them off the healthy food onto the chicken nuggets, because the chemicals, the process, the salt, the sugar, all of that is designed to create addictions.
Well, I did notice that, if we did go out sort of with their friends, they did want to be like their friends. But I think the UK culture is more like the American model rather than the European model.
Yes, it definitely is.
I think, like Jamie, maybe we should catch people young. And I used to say to my children, you try it 3 times, and then if you really don't like it, you really don't like it.
What a lovely policy.
By the time that they've tried it the 3rd time, they've kind of forgotten all their prejudices, and they get on with it.
But look at the jip that Jamie... I love the way we all talk about him. We're on first-name terms with Jamie. I don't know if he's listening today, but he'll enjoy that. So look at the jip he took for simply trying to help people to a place that you managed to get to without any help.
And in addition, I might add that since I've seen my children grow up, now my eldest is 34, my youngest is 25, I have seen sport go right out the window at school. My oldest, who's 34, used to do a lot more sport than his
That's a
sister,
good point.
And
not just within school. I wonder what austerity's done to kind of council-supported facilities and pitches and teams and clubs and that sort of thing as well. Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Elena. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. That's the end of my Greek part of the programme today. It's 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I was trying to think what mystery hour is in Greek, but I can't do it. That's pathetic. Mystery is probably almost certainly a Greek word, isn't it? So someone's about to text and go, James, you dope. It's mysteri ora. Tora.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
4 minutes after 12. I was pretty close by all accounts. Ora. I'll do it now. So, Τώρα είναι ώρα μυστηρίου με James O'Brien. Zito! If you've just tuned in, don't worry. It's as normal as it'll ever be. Mystery Hour is upon us. Your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. Answers, questions, mysteries solved. Illumination introduced. We may interrupt it briefly if the findings of the report into Dominic Raab's alleged bullying are released in the course of the next hour, but in a way it's quite good to have Mystery Hour up and running because all the rolling news stations are just going to be repeating the fact that they're expecting the revelations or the results to be released, to be published sometime soon. But the report is now with Rishi Sunak, whereas happily upon this radio station the ball is now in your court. You can win a board game, by the way. I must say hello to Charlie and Emma, if you're still listening. And where they went to see Book of Mormon last night, Charlie's birthday, happened to be enjoying a cooling lager. Actually, it was quite an odd cocktail. It had a big slice of pineapple in it. As I made my way out of the building yesterday, they were happy to bump into me. And I forgot what was I going to mention about them now? The board game. It happens increasingly now, where people say, we got the board game and we love it. It puts a little spring in my step. So you can win a copy of the board game, a box of the board game, the Mystery Hour board game, by being my favourite contributor of the day. Full terms and conditions at lbc.co.uk, and you can get hold of your own copy if you're not lucky enough to win one at mysteryhour.co.uk. I think should we just crack on? I'll tell you what, I've been doing really round the houses introductions lately. I don't know if Keith noticed, but I've hit the 21-minute mark on both hours this morning. How many this week have I done the 21-minute mark on? It's a record. He stopped counting, bless him. So let's just crack straight on this one, shall we? And then if you don't know what's going on, you can work it out. It will come in quite straightforwardly. Kathy is in Redruth. Kathy, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Kathy.
And I'm really nervous this morning.
Why?
I just am.
Okay.
I don't usually get to hear Mystery Hour live. I'm usually in work.
Oh.
I'm hoping you know the answer to this one. I have two passports. I have a British passport and an Irish passport. Exactly. I'm hoping you know the answer. If I leave the UK, if I go on a package tour or whatever, they'll ask me to give details of one passport and use it.
Yes.
But people independently, say on a ferry or whatever, can I leave the UK on one and return on the other?
I think it depends where you're going.
I
don't know the answer, is the short answer, but I think it's a great question for a number of reasons. I think it's going to depend where you're going, because if you're going into if you're going into the EU, apart from Ireland, then they need to keep count, don't they, of your 90 days.
That's my thought.
So they probably...
If I'm going in on an Irish passport, then no, they don't.
But they won't bother. So if you go in on the Irish passport, I don't think anyone's going to stop you coming back. Now, why am I saying this out loud? This is really important stuff. I've no idea. I know nothing.
See my point?
Yes.
Will the British computer then goof if it doesn't know?
But it doesn't. In the great picture of it, doesn't matter, because by dint of having an Irish passport, you can spend as long as you want in the European Union, can't you?
Yes. If I go for a fortnight and then try and come back...
Yeah, then will it... there's no reason to do that.
To returning on a British passport, but there might be.
No, so we're just looking for whether it's technically possible to do so.
It's technically possible.
Because there's no benefit to doing it whatsoever. You're right. I like that question. I went to Dublin recently and I did think about trying that. I don't know whether you go out on the one and come back on the other, but I'm like you. I'm just curious. I can't see that there would be any particular benefit to it, but we will find out for you, Kathy. Have your nerves diminished?
Little, yes.
You see, that's the thing. That's
my
always...
Greek gets no further than Eucharisto, so I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's pretty good. That's a start. That's where we all start, I think. Jennifer's in Peterborough. Jennifer, question or answer?
Question, please, James. God, I'm really nervous. It's my second time. I don't know what to do with myself.
It gets easier.
It doesn't. It really does.
Of course it does. It's only me, for goodness sake. Now,
that's the problem. That's the problem. So, always, it's me, Stilton Jen. So I live in Stilton, okay?
Yes.
Always lived in villages. Bearing in mind, population would have been a hell of a lot less back in the olden days. Every village I've lived in, an average 4 to 5 pubs, okay? There could have been one that could have been, a bit of a shop, sold goods, things like that. Why so many pubs in little villages with tiny populations?
Well, it's a good question, but what about churches?
Yeah, well, churches, there's not as many.
Well, no, there are. I mean, not as many, but they're huge.
Yeah, well,
even in small villages, some of the people must have traipsed for miles to go to church back in the day. So a pub was a crucial. I mean, it was the only place anybody could go. So the village. I don't find it as mysterious as you do, Jen.
Oh, I do, because the population would have been so much less. So it was like...
Why would it have been less? The population would have been more.
No, because the houses over the space of and farms, things like that, over the space of the
people were living in people were living in holes back in the day. There'd have been thousands of them. Farm workers.
No.
Yes.
No,
there was no machines. It was all humans. There was more humans, but in villages than. No. Well, what's your answer then? Clever Club?
I don't know. Hence my why I'm bringing James. Because if there's so many pubs, right, for this, in comparison to the population, whether you agree with that or not, okay, there would have been so fewer people in these pubs.
Well, I've got an answer for you, which is it's not definitive, but it is definitely helpful. So you need to stop thinking of a pub in the modern sense of a pub, and you have to think of it instead as a house where one room was given over to selling ale. Well, don't make that noise. That's just true. There was a great documentary on the radio the other day about some murders in Scotland, where it was commonplace. At first I'd heard about the practice in Scotland, but that's what pubs were. They were homes. They were houses where there would be one room given over to selling ale that was usually brewed on the premises. And if you think of it in those terms, you'd only need 7 or 8 customers, wouldn't you? Have you seen The Banshees of Inisherin yet?
No.
Oh, you must. It's a beautiful film. Absolutely. But the old rural Irish pubs still fit that model. Whereas you're thinking of a sort of a chef and brewer, aren't you? Or a big, well, you are. You're thinking you get your scampi and chips. You get your scampi and chips. Have a game of pool. Several rooms function. One for the ladies. Saloon bar. Spittoons. No, you're not thinking of just a single room where you can have a beer, which is what the pubs in the villages would have been back in the day.
Well, some of them still are, James.
Yes, that's true.
In, tiny villages sometimes, and in my head I was always thinking, there's a hell of a lot of land, so less people.
All right. I'm pretty sure I've nailed it, but I can sense your scepticism, so I will leave it hanging on the board. We've already said thank you.
My life sceptic, James.
Well, that's the best way to live it. We've already said thank you for the presents that you sent us, haven't we?
I'm so glad you enjoyed them.
They were delicious. I don't know what Keith did with the chocolates, but the cheese went down a treat. And listen, I do get your text, and I know you're going through a tough time at the moment, so you take care of yourself.
Bless you.
All right?
Well, I'll try to, and if you keep on showing up every day, I'll be all right.
I promise I'll keep keeping you company if you promise you keep keeping me company, all right?
Promise. Pinky promise.
Take care. Thank you. They must get an answer for Jan on the pubs question. 12 minutes after 12 is the time. Kevin is in Wellingborough. Kevin, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
I was on a flight back from Turkey the other day.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that really gets to me, and I don't understand why, is why when you take off and land, do you have to put your seat arms down?
Usually the answer to questions like this is quite morbid, and it's something to do with the preparation for crash. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? If you think about it, if you jar on landing, if you have a really bad landing, you're going to be thrust into your upturned. It's going to hit you in the chest.
What, the actual seat?
The upturned arm is.
The upturned arm goes behind you, though, doesn't it? It goes to the seat behind you.
But you've been shoved sideways. You see, there's nothing to land on if your arm is down. If your arm is up, and it's an unlikely angle, I grant you, but it is going to you're massively increasing the chance of you being impaled upon your own seat arm. It's got to be.
It's got to be that.
It's got to be that.
It's got to be that. I can understand the tray, obviously, because if you lurch forward, you're going to hit yourself.
Same reason, though, isn't it? Same reason, less likely.
Yeah, but your seatbelt would probably keep you from moving.
No, I'm not backing. I'm not backing on probably there, mate. Not when it comes to getting impaled on my own seat arm. Probably's cutting no mustard. I think it's that.
You think it's that?
Yeah.
You could be right.
Well, no, all right. I sense you're not. I'll leave it on the board then, shall I?
Okay, if you could please, that'd be awesome.
Charming. Honestly, I'm providing these top dollar gold standard answers, and I'm just being surrounded by scepticism at every turn. Richard's in Bath. Richard, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
Snooker. So It's quite topical. Not about orange powder, you'll be pleased to hear. I've just noticed over the years, I've watching snooker for years.
Yeah, me too.
And I've noticed that a lot of players, it's not all of them, but when they put their bridge hand down on the table, their middle finger starts to twitch and it'll go up and down just before they play the shot. And I thought, well, why? And I've been wondering it for years. And the thing is, I've even seen amateurs doing it in the clubs as well. So, did one player start and then everybody just copied them, or
do you play yourself?
To a very low amateur standard.
It's just the middle finger, the actual middle finger, the swearing finger.
Just the middle finger. So if you're a right-handed player, it'll be your left hand.
Yeah, no.
And you've probably seen it yourself, but
I think it's like I do it myself. I think it's like sticking your tongue out when you're threading a needle.
Possibly.
I think it's drawing your attention. It's focusing your attention down to the tip of the cue area.
Yeah, it's just bizarre that some players do and some don't. So I thought, well, did one player start and someone copied it, or is it a learned thing? Or,
no, not. It's not. No one's I wouldn't imagine any. Well, I don't know, but I imagine it is just reflexive, and some do it and some don't. In the same way that some people stick their tongue out when they're threading a needle because it helps them concentrate more, and some people don't.
Yeah,
I like it
because I can't see it adds anything to the success of the pot. So anyway,
you don't know that unless you force someone not to do it, unless you tape their finger to the baize and then see whether or not they play just as well.
That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
It would be. Who do you fancy this year?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just enjoying the snooker this year. So
I did a tweet the other night. About the game that I just watched. Guess who liked it? I didn't even know he followed me on Twitter. I was so excited.
Was it either a Davis or Hendry? Or?
Sean Murphy, mate.
Oh, fantastic!
I know. I was over the moon. I've been on best behaviour on Twitter ever since. Don't want to disturb Sean as he's preparing to play, or indeed to commentate. 12:16 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
Mystery Hour on LBC with James O'Brien.
It's 12:18. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Don't text me your top tips for who's going to win the snooker this year. It's still the first round. But I did think Jack Jones played beautifully. Yeah, that was a really exciting crucible. Can we do a phone in on snooker with that? No. What do you people know? Honestly, do you think this has become the most popular show on commercial radio, talk show on commercial radio, by accident, or do you think it's because of my instincts and my team effort, as much as snooker? Well, snooker is, of course. Alex is in Lewis. Alex, question or answer?
Hi there, James. A question, please.
Carry on.
So imagine it's a windy day. Why is it that most of the time the wind comes in gusts rather than a continuous, flow of air? It comes and goes in gusts, and why is that?
I'm still imagining. God, it's windy, eh? It's windy, eh? Windy. Whoa. You mean, yeah. Are you sure it does?
Well, on most windy days, you don't get a constant, wind at a constant speed.
No, it varies slightly, but I don't know. I mean, is that a mystery? Is that a mystery?
I think it's a mystery because I understand the mechanism of what causes wind. It's when air's flowing from, I think it's an area of high pressure to low pressure. But why does it come and go in fits and bursts?
Yeah, so why gusty?
Yeah. I think it's a fair question.
I don't know. I do as well. I wasn't just sort of. Yeah, you're on. I like it. Can I stop imagining it's a windy day now?
No, carry on. I was quite enjoying the sound effects.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Have a great day. Chris is in Singapore. Question or answer?
Hi, James. It's answer for you.
Top man, carry on.
It's regarding passports.
Yes.
On dual nationalities on passports. So you can use one passport, go out with one, and come back on another. Definitely.
Qualifications, I think I can work this one out.
I work in corporate business travel for 30 years.
So, I mean, there'd be some circumstances in which you might get pulled over for doing it, no? I mean, if they're keeping count of your days in a certain territory or something like that.
It's very popular in so it would rarely be used in tourism. But in corporate travel, for instance, say you had Australian and UK dual nationality.
Yeah.
So if you were flying to Australia, you'd obviously use your Australia passport going out because you don't need a visa to apply for a visa, and then just come back on your UK one.
Because
but if you had
customs would be quicker. Customs would be quicker back here on your UK passport than your Australian passport.
Exactly. And that's it. There's also countries like if you fly to Israel, it will cause certain problems if you're flying to other countries where they won't accept an Israeli stamp.
Or if you visited.
You would have either two passports or a dual nationality.
Perfect answer and perfect qualifications. So we don't know specifically Kathy's query about the British and the Irish passport, but she didn't ask specifically about the British and the Irish passport. She asked about the general principle.
Yeah, the principle with the English and Irish, it doesn't matter because they have the Anglo-Irish agreement. So
yeah, but if you're going to France, on a British passport now, then you're limited to 90 days. Whereas if you're an Irish passport, you can stay for as long as you want.
Yeah, so I'm going to apply for my Irish passport thanks to my parents for that sole reason that when I fly back to the UK, when I want a holiday in Europe, I will fly out on my Irish passport.
Yeah, quite
but then I could re-enter on my Irish passport.
Have your parents still got Irish passports themselves?
Yes,
they have.
Yes,
that makes it quite easy then for you, quite straightforward.
Yeah, definitely.
Good
Working
man.
in the trade also helps.
Yeah, no, you can't have too many passports, can you? James Bond told me.
No, exactly. and don't worry about the board game. I bought it at Christmas. It's fantastic.
Top man. A bit presumptuous there, thinking that you might be in with a chance of winning, Chris. But I appreciate
I'll give it to my son.
I can't send it to Singapore anyway. Lovely stuff. Round of applause for Chris there. Another satisfied customer for the Mystery Hour board game. Another good answer to the question. Georgina is in Pontyclun. Question or answer, Georgina?
Hiya. It's a pretty basic, but I hope nice question.
Yes.
It's a question about lambs, and I'm wondering at what age or what point in a lamb or sheep's life do they lose their bound?
God, they do actually bounce about, don't they, lambs?
They are so cute as they bounce about.
When do they start? Is that all right? You're on. I mean, I don't want to bring it down to grim definitions, but I wonder. I mean, when does a lamb stop being a lamb in terms of what you can buy in the butchers? Is pertinent as well. Does a lamb ever stop bouncing, or is it actually no longer a lamb? And that is one of the measures of which.
Well, potentially, I don't know, but the sheep they aren't bouncing around like the lambs do.
They're big. I read the other day that if you find a sheep on its side with its legs in the air, particularly at this time of year, the word is cast. Do you know this?
No.
And you should roll it back onto its feet because it's probably pregnant and it can't get back up again.
Well, I'll definitely look out for it.
No, well, we all will now. I mean, I'm unlikely to come across many on my way home from Leicester Square, but you never know. You're possibly more likely in Pontyclun. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's Pontyclun.
Why didn't you tell me when you came? Why didn't you correct me when I came?
I didn't want to correct you.
Well, you must correct me. If you don't correct me, then how am I ever going to improve?
That's fair enough.
Pontyclun.
Do you know what it means?
Bridge on a stream?
Yeah, well, yeah, close. Bridge over the river, clean it is. So Pontyclun,
Pontyclun. Who gets a round of applause? For nobody. Keith, behave yourself, honestly. I like being corrected. I wrote a whole book about it. Thank you, Georgina. Terry's in Chelsea. Terry, question or answer?
It's a bit of a frivolous question, James.
Oh, dear.
If camera lenses are round, why are photographs square?
Because film is square, or rather...
But why? But why not have square lenses? Why?
Well, why would you want a square lens? It's
why
mimicking...
not? It'd look cool, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't look cool at all, because it would mimic... The lens is convex or concave, isn't it, depending on which way you're looking at it. So it's mimicking the action of an eye. If it was square, it would not. You wouldn't get a proper true image. You'd get a weird, distorted image.
But the thing is, so are we saying
this is a pointless conversation because there's nothing you can say is going to render me wrong.
James, no conversations are pointless.
He's gone philosophical. He's gone philosophical. All right, I'll take that. That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
It's just one of those stupid things, I think. I know it's...
so you want a technical answer there? You want someone who...
No, it was just a stupid question.
No, don't say that. I like it. Don't do that. If you do it down, it might make the board game if we get it going, mate. You don't want to be doing it down. This could end up being in the booster pack of questions and answers for the board game.
All right.
So, the answer is... Because if you try and imagine a pyramid with a smooth top, so you've got a square shape... I can hardly see it, Terry, let alone imagine it on a camera.
Well, it's one of those strange things. It's just
Someone
the
will
lens
tell you.
looks at the world in the round,
Like an
and
eye.
in the round, and then we get it in the square. What's going on there?
I wish someone might know. 0345 606 0973. Thank you, Terry. Rig welted, I'm told, is the technical term for the sheet that I just described, but my advice is sound. David's in Holborn. David, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
It's for the snooker.
Yes.
The middle finger going up and down, it's tempo. Yes. It's done so some players will count to 6, 5, 4, whatever the number is.
Oh, really?
And also, it's done for tempo, and also it's to stop them snatching at the shot. So even though some do, so it's literally to get down 1, 2, 3, and you'll see they pull the cue back and forward when they're doing it.
So take your time. It's like a sort of
count to 10.
A warm-up, concentration. There's quite a lot going on there, and it's very deliberate. So it's very deliberate.
And so obviously because they're playing to a high level, they're playing for a lot of money, so it just calms them down a bit.
Qualifications?
I used to know Jimmy White. I asked Jimmy White the question at Wimbledon Dogs many moons ago, and he gave me that answer.
That's a pretty solid qualification, I think.
Yeah, it's also name dropping.
Well, I'm a big fan of name dropping on this programme, as you well know. I've never met Jimmy White, actually. Do you know him well?
I used to know him well. When I used to, in another lifetime, I used to go dog racing, almost like a semi-professional greyhound. And he used to come up to me and advise me what dogs would. What dogs ain't, what dogs would and what dogs wouldn't.
And you specifically asked him that question.
I exactly asked him that question because it used to bug me.
No, I love it. There you go. All right, round of applause for David. I love that qualification.
Thank you very much indeed.
That's one of my all-time favourites. Jimmy White told me down at the Dogs. Love it. 12:27 is the time. Richard is in Cornwall. Richard, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
The one about the pubs.
Yes.
It kind of sounds. You kind of gave it to me a little bit, but being a farmer, the farm I currently work at is 500 acres.
Yeah.
In years gone by, there would have been hundreds of people that would have worked on this farm.
Yeah.
Instead of just me at the moment.
You're doing it all yourself. Are you literally doing it as we speak? Because I can hear some sort of movement in the background.
I am in a tractor, and your colleague wasn't a bit worried about the noise in the background.
I like the noise in the background. I think it adds atmosphere. What have you got? What have you got to? So you do 500 acres single-handedly.
No, pretty much. We have outside help come in, but there's not
for harvest.
There's
and stuff
nowhere
like that.
near. Well, at the moment we're spreading slurry at the moment.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm attached to a big long pipe with three other people pumping slurry to me. So I can't really, as much as your colleague wanted me to stop, I can't really.
No, that's fine. I mean, normally it's a health and safety thing, and for the quality of the call, if you're driving up the M4. But I think if you're attached to a big long pipe, Richard, pumping slurry all over the place, it's best not to interrupt.
No, and I do. And to be fair, I'm not even driving. The tractor's driving itself. So I'm sitting here observing the tractor.
Is it really? Good Lord, this is getting more exciting by the minute. So back in the day, if you were farming 500 acres, how many staff would you have had? How many workers would be in the?
Easily over 100.
Yeah, there it is.
So therefore, they would have all wanted a drink. They'd all want to go to the pub. There would have been no TV at home.
No.
There would have been no kind of entertainment at home.
Correct.
Not a lot of entertainment. But, so
no Mystery Hour board game at home.
No Mystery Hour board game at home. No James O'Brien on the radio to listen to.
Straight down the pub then.
You really got straight down the pub.
And added to the fact that pubs would have been houses with one room where you could drink beer, so that's why there would be so many of them in any case. Where would the average agricultural worker have lived then? Because Jen also pointed out that there's not that many dwellings in these villages. There would have
been more dwellings, but the dwellings wouldn't have been anywhere near the size that they are at the moment.
And you'd have families in a single room and all that kind of thing. And all
so families in a single room. There's still workers' cottages on the farm now.
Yeah.
That one family or one single person lives in a workers' cottage.
Yes.
But back then, an entire family would have lived in that cottage.
Yeah. Do you know there was I grew up. I sort of grew up on a farm. We didn't obviously farm it, but there was still an attached cottage to the farm where we lived. And when I was a kid, it still had a soil floor. Can you believe that?
Yeah, no, that's quite common.
I know.
It's quite common.
Well, I know you know that. I was doing it for the benefit of people who aren't farmers.
Yeah.
Qualifications, Richard? You've already told us, really.
And a farmer.
Round of applause.
And your
fan of pubs,
sheep, which I just heard as well, is perfectly correct.
Oh, thank goodness for that. It'd be very embarrassing if I'd endangered the sheep of of the nation with. But it is true, and if they can't get back up again, especially if they're pregnant, then help them out. Holly Harris is here with your headlines.
Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. This is LBC.
12:34 is the time, and thank goodness that we don't work for a rolling news television station who are still talking about the fact that the Prime Minister has received the Dominic Raab report and as yet hasn't really revealed what's in it. How do you string this out? So, during my sort of weird career, one thing I've never really had to do, except just for a few minutes on PMQs before it starts, when Theo and I or Lewis and I or Ben and I would just desperately try to fill the available space with meaninglessness. Apart from on occasions of state, when I've found myself, watching the Prime Minister or the Queen make her way to the state opening of Parliament or something like that, I've never really had to do the epic efforts of space filling. But because I've never been a correspondent, I've only really been a presenter in broadcasting terms. So it's a great gift, isn't it? So thanks for coming back to me with the same question that you asked me 20 minutes ago, to which I have no new answers whatsoever. But what's very important to remember at this time, John, is that Dominic Raab is an Aries. And as such, he will be... Oh, I beg your pardon. He's a Sagittarius. And as such, he will be quite in two minds. That's a Gemini. He'll be in two minds about what is likely to... Rishi Sunak, of course, is a great player of pool. And therefore, he will be hovering over the corner pocket at this point in the hope of securing a pot. And I'm just hearing that we still don't know what is in Dominic Raab's bullying report, and as yet, no news. John, back to the studio. Chris is in Manchester. Chris, question or answer?
Question. Why is it the year 2080 in Nepal?
Big Busted fans? They're in a hurry to get to the year 3000? Come on. Well, I mean, it will have something to do with religion.
But why then? Why? How do they come to the presumption that it's 2080?
Are you sure that they did?
Well,
I mean, when were you last there?
I've not.
You've not been?
No.
How do you know what year it is?
My boys told me that they learned it at school.
Oh, okay.
So I looked it up, and it is 2080, but I can't find why.
56 years ahead of us. 56 years and 6 months ahead of us. All right, we'll find out. I mean, it must have something to do with their religion, mustn't it?
Well, yeah, that's what I guessed, but the boys didn't tell me anything more than that.
I think you should take this up at parents' evening, Chris. They can't just dishing out these kind of bombshell information nuggets without giving them any context or explanation of why that actually is.
I know. I mean, this is why teachers are failing us, because not.
This is why we don't support their strike, because they give us. Exactly. We are joking, teacher friends.
Yeah.
You're on. Yeah. Why is it the year 2080 in Nepal? I love that. And what you're going to do is just drop it in over tea tonight, aren't you? Oh, lads. You know why?
Yeah,
you know why?
Tell them that I found everything out.
Yeah, exactly that. That's because that's what dads do. 12:38 is the time, and Sally is in Worcester Park. Sally, question or answer?
It's a question, please.
Carry on.
Today is my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, darling. And my family are joking about giving me the bump.
Yes.
And I have always wondered, why do we grab people by the ankles and the wrists and throw them up in the air for their birthday? I just think it's a little bit terrifying.
Well, yeah, I mean, is there an answer to it, do you think? Is that, I mean, you're just because you're doing one for each year, so it's only like candles, or someone's going to ring in and ask about... Don't ring in and ask about candles, you won't get on. So it's just a way of counting, isn't it? It's just a mode of counting. I think it started in Scotland, for oddly, and it may have been called the dumps at one point rather than the bumps.
But, I mean, there's other ways to count.
Yeah, but of course there are. There's other ways to count than candles. It's more fun, isn't it? Throw
a child up in the air.
Way, yeah.
What, and possibly
Oh, don't be such
in their head.
Don't be such a nanny state. Don't be so nanny state. You've got to throw a kid around. It teaches them what's the word? Robustness. So you want the actual origins? When did it start happening? How many bumps? Can I ask how many bumps it would be today, Sally? You don't have to tell me.
Unfortunately, it's 43.
43 bumps. It's neither Nout nor Summit, that, is it? You got a big one for the 40th, bigger one for the 50th these days, but you're just in that sort of weird hinterland now for another 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And they're not going to give it. Are you doing anything nice? I sound like a hairdresser.
I went out on Saturday and got very, very inebriated.
At 43? I bet you didn't feel right until Tuesday.
Yeah, I know. What is that?
I don't know, but you can't have that. You've already asked your question. I don't know. Why do we do the bumps and don't give them to Sally? Because it wouldn't be funny. Well, I like it. It's a good question. And happy birthday once again. 20 to 1 is the time. Harry's in Lakeside. Harry, question or answer?
Hi, answer, James.
Carry on, Harry.
Lovely to speak with you again.
Right,
so it's about the Cameron lens being round. It has everything to do with the light distribution to the sensor.
Yeah.
So for the light to hit the sensor, the light needs to reach the sensor evenly.
Correct.
When you have a rectangular lens, the distance from the edge of the rectangular to the sensor is not equidistant. Exactly. Whereas a round one, a circle, the edge to the center of the circle, i.e. the sensor, is equidistant. And therefore, when you have a round lens, you eliminate the possibility of vignetting. But even that, you need a very high glass lens, and that's why some of them cost thousands of pounds. To eliminate the
it's a brilliant answer. It's a brilliant answer, and completely definitive. What are your qualifications, Harry?
I'm a professional photographer and YouTube videographer.
What sort of stuff do you specialise in?
So mostly is travel, walking tour in different part of Europe, mostly. But also around the world sometimes, but mostly in Europe, just walking around showing the different cities to people.
Lovely stuff. Do you want to give your YouTube channel a free advert?
Oh, that'd be brilliant. Thank you, James. It's called Global Hopper on YouTube.
Lovely. We shall push some traffic your way as we speak. And of course, you get a round of applause as well.
Oh, thank you so much.
Lovely stuff. Thank you, Harry. 12:42. Quite a few people asking if I could do the coronation commentary in the style that I'm covering the Dominic Raab. The answer is no, I'm off. I'm not in on Saturdays. 12:42 is the time. Hang on, some breaking news for you. The PM is still considering the Dominic Raab bullying report. There is as yet no news to add to the story that broke at about 11:30 this morning and that we have been covering ever since, with absolutely no information to add. I can confirm, John, there is still no new information to add. Back to the studio. Angie's in Telford. Question or answer?
Hiya, James.
Hello.
It's a question, please.
Carry on.
It might be a bit of a stupid question, and I'm a first-time caller. I'm so sorry.
I like stupid questions. We'd be lost without them.
I've got lots of them. But anyway, I'm wondering, it's something that's always, it's been a bugbear for me. Why do Americans call petty theft, spell it in the French way, P-E-T-I-T?
They don't.
They do?
They don't.
They do.
Where did you get that from?
Because I read a lot of, I see a lot of crime documentaries.
Yeah.
I read a lot of crime, and even dating back to the 60s and 70s, it's always noted as petty, P-E-T-I-T.
You're right as well, and I'm wrong. I often have. The more convinced I am, the more sort of patronising and condescending I am when I'm telling someone they're wrong on Mystery Hour, the more likely it is that I then turn out to be the one that's wrong subsequently. And well, I mean, is it a mystery?
Is it a mystery?
Because here's what here's what I would think. Right, it comes from the French.
Yeah.
And we have anglicised the spelling, and they haven't.
Yeah.
And they haven't.
Right. I just wondered why they haven't.
Well, they had. I mean, they're French. What's the name of the dude in Hamilton? The one the French dude who came over. No, not Hamilton. Lafayette. Yeah. The French influence on American jurisprudence. I don't.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I'd be surprised. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't the fact that is the origin of it for everybody. And our petty, P-E-T-T-Y, is an anglicisation of the French word for little, because it means the theft of something of low value, whether you're in America or the UK.
Yeah.
So that would probably be it. But it's not a stupid question, I'll tell you that for nothing.
Oh, thank you.
It's a great question, but I don't know the answer, so I will put it on the board. With my apologies for being so dismissive of you at the beginning there.
Oh, no, not at all. Thank you. As I said, I'm a first-time caller. And
how was it? What would you say? What would you say to people who haven't yet plucked up the courage to ring in, but are quite keen to? As a now almost finished, almost completed first-time caller, Angie, what advice would you pass on, or otherwise?
I would say try not to have the nerves, because there's no point, because you're very kind as well, so
that's lovely. Very good.
Easy to talk to.
Well, I do my best, although obviously I'm distracted by the enormous amounts of breaking news unfolding while Angie and I are talking. I can confirm that the PM is still considering the Dominic Raab bullying report that he received at about 11:30 this morning, and about which we have been talking ever since, without any new information whatsoever. More on that after this.
This is LBC Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 12:49 and some breaking news for you. The Prime Minister is still considering the Dominic Raab report that he received at 11:30 this morning. I can confirm absolutely nothing has changed since that point, despite the fact that we've now been talking about it for 1 hour and 20 minutes. Back to the studio. Gary's in Catford. Gary, question or answer?
Question, James.
Carry on, Gary.
Right. I'm wondering, when you're sleeping in a room with people having a conversation.
What?
Right?
Yeah.
And they say your name, like, okay, we'll be having a conversation about James. In a sentence, we mention James.
Yeah.
But you never answer.
Yeah.
And as soon as we said James, you wake up.
What?
Why?
Whoa. What? What? So so I'm asleep, and you say my name, and I wake up.
I said it in a sentence.
Yeah.
Like, oh, James is a bad radio presenter.
Fair enough.
You never wake.
Yeah.
But as soon as you said James.
Oh, I see. Well, 'cause it's your tone, isn't it? You're reaching into my sleep when you do that, I think.
But we've been having a conversation all along.
Yeah, but you're not reaching into my sleep. It's a bit like shaking me verbally when you, James, Gary, wake up, Gary.
No, I don't believe it, James.
So I could be sitting. I could say Gary's a pretty boring caller. I can't believe you've let him on, for example, couldn't I? But then and then I go, Gary, then it's going to be different. It's going to reach into your dreams. You're going to think you're going to hear it in your dream. You're going to do that little bit in the dream where you sort of think, that's a bit weird. Why is someone shouting Gary? I'm riding a unicorn in Brexitania. What?
You don't have to call twice. Just say
Gary.
James.
Well, I don't know. This might just be your friend. I don't know that this is true. You can't just say it once and then everything suddenly. All right, I'll put it on the board. But if you get an answer to that, I'll give you the money myself, Gary.
I think it's a spiritual connection.
Do you?
Yeah. Just throw it on there, James.
I'll put it. Just before you go, you don't really think I'm a bad radio presenter, do you, Gary?
Don't. You're the best. You're the best, James.
That's more like it. Oh, that woke me up. Thank you very much indeed. We need to know why it's 2080 in Nepal, why we give people the bumps on their birthday, why they call it petit, with a T, with two T's theft in France, in America rather, why you wake up if someone just calls your name once when you're asleep, on the camera, when do lambs stop gambling or bouncing around the place, and why is the wind all gusty? Quite a lot to get through. And I gave myself I should have given myself the armrest question, but I didn't. So I've also forgotten. No one reminded me to recap on the questions until there's 7 minutes left. So that's why quite a lot of them haven't been answered. You see what I do there? Effortlessly passing responsibility for my own failures onto my team. That's the kind of behaviour that could see me in the cabinet by Christmas. I could be I'd say Keith's name every 20 minutes to make sure he's still awake. Tyler's in Scarborough. Tyler, question or answer?
I've got a question. I'm sorry.
What? That's all right. You're not going to get an answer to it, but at least we won't have dead air or going back live to Downing Street to find out that the Prime Minister is still considering the Dominic Raab bullying report. Go on. What's it going to be?
Okay. If you've ever been to Five Guys, you'll know that they have complimentary peanuts in those massive boxes. I've always, and they're encased in their natural shell.
God, you sound like an advertising copyright. They're encased in their natural shell, are they, Tyler? You mean they're in their shell? They're not encased in their natural shell. Who do you think you are, Marks and Spencers? They're encased. This is no ordinary peanut. It's encased in its natural shell. It's in its shell, mate.
Yes. It's important for the question because they're salty inside.
Are they?
And they're all salty.
All right.
And I don't think they're naturally salty. So I wonder how they make them salty.
Really fine salt.
Well, they're in the shell.
Yeah, but it's porous. It's not watertight.
Okay, wouldn't that just mush the shell? Because I've thought about this many ways.
No, because you've got salt on your fingers when you take the nut out of the shell and then you put it in your mouth. What's going to happen?
No.
Yes. Try it with a knife and fork.
So these things are salty already inside this shell.
You don't know that because you're using your fingers to transfer them from the shell to your mouth, and your fingers have opened the shell, which has salt on it.
Well, I don't eat things with salt on my fingers.
You've got salt on your fingers because you've opened the shell.
So it's a bit of a reach. I mean, I would.
How can it be a reach? It is a shell, right? A natural shell encasing a nut. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's covered in salt.
Yeah.
How are you going to open it?
Well, you've got to open it with your fingers. But
where does the salt go?
Yeah, but you can have peanuts that are non-salty. You know what I mean? You can have non-salted peanuts and they don't taste salty.
Because they've not had salt sprinkled all over them while they were still encased in the natural shell.
But how do you get it through the shell?
You don't get it through the shell. You don't have to get it through the shell because it's on the shell and it goes onto your fingers when you open the shell with your fingers. If you don't sprinkle the ones that are encased in their natural shells with salt, if you leave them au naturel, as you would say, and then you open it up with your fingers, it's not going to be salty when you pop it in your gob, is it?
Have I just rang national radio and made a wally of myself?
No, I don't even know if I'm right. I've never given it any thought before in my life, but I just sort of found myself going off on a bit of an exploratory tangent, which must be correct.
Well, we love the tangents.
We love the tangents. It's all about the tangents. A round of applause for Tyler, I think. And me, as it were. It's got to be that. It's got until someone rings in and it probably isn't time to say, oh, James. Let's just run through what you just said. Martin's in Cornwall. Martin, question or answer?
I've got an answer for you, James.
Carry on.
Okay, it's about the wind. We've spoken before about jumbo jets doing loop-the-loops and things. So sort of aviation related slightly. When we're flying or when you're doing your navigation stuff for flying, what you tend to do is anything, the wind above 2,000 feet is constant.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So you've got to do your calculations. It's sort of trigonometry stuff, but they make it easier with little devices and stuff.
Yeah.
And you can, if you're above 2,000 feet, you take the wind as constant. Yeah. Anything below 2,000 feet is being affected by the friction of stuff on the earth. Turbulence and stuff like
buildings,
that.
Houses, mountains.
Trees, hills, anything like that.
So so it's pure wind up at 2,000 feet. The lower you come, the more obstacles it's got to steer around, and therefore it hits you in a gustily fashion.
Correct. Yeah, that'll be why when you come into land, especially on a slower aeroplane, like a little light aircraft like I fly, you will find that the approach down to landing is usually a lot bumpier than the flight.
Of course it is. Makes perfect sense. Round of qualifications, you've already said.
Got a private pilot's licence.
Round of applause. Lovely stuff.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. We like that. Lewis is in Putney. Lewis, question or answer?
Answer, James.
Don't let me down, Lewis.
It's Nepalese New Year, or
yes.
the Nepalese year.
Yes.
So this is their calendar goes from it crosses Nepal and India, but it's based from the reign of a king called Vikram Samrat.
Yes.
And so he's a sort of King Arthurish Buddhist type figure.
Cool.
And so they measure from him.
There you go.
From his reign.
There it is. So religious stroke royal.
Yes.
Round of applause. Qualifications?
I was climbing a mountain in the Himalayas, and when we did it and got back into Kathmandu, it was Nepalese New Year, and I found out by asking the locals.
A round of applause. Absolutely. Vintage qualifications there coming in at the end from Lewis. The Prime Minister is still considering the Dominic Raab bullying report. Derek's in Hastings. Derek, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
It's to the question of why you hear your name when you're asleep and it wakes you up.
If it's said in a certain way, I think, was Gary's point.
Well, the theory is, Trousman's theory of attenuated attention. The idea is that our ears are listening all the time, but a bit of our brain switches it off for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But if something triggers that, like your name or perhaps your occupation, it switches it back on and you become attend to it.
That makes
sense. It's also
sense.
known as the cocktail party phenomenon, where you might be in a crowd and suddenly something gets your attention.
Qualifications?
I studied Open University psychology about 30 years ago.
Fantastic. I love it. A round of applause for Derek. We love the Open University as well. My dad got a degree there, just so that I wouldn't be the first person in the family to get a degree. Did I ever tell you that? It's coming up to 1 o'clock. Can we squeeze in one more? Stevie's in Bangor. Quickly, Stevie.
Hi, how's it going, James?
Grand, thanks. What question or answer? What is it?
It's
Peanuts, quickly.
An answer about the peanuts.
Yeah.
They're soaked in brine before they're roasted.
Yeah,
so
fair
therefore
enough.
the salt penetrates through.
Okay, so I was wrong.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
There's not going to sell many ice creams going at that speed. Have a round of applause.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give it to Jen because she bribed me with Stilton cheese. She sent me a box of Stilton cheese last week, so she gets the ball game this week. I think that's the least we can do. That's Jennifer in Peterborough. You got some cheese as well. Why are you looking like that? It is time to cross live to Downing Street. No, it isn't. It's time to say goodbye for another day. Don't forget that if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also rewind live radio. LBC's shows are there in their entirety, as well as the world's biggest podcasts, including the Mystery Hour back catalogue, self-contained chunks of Mystery Hour that you can listen to your heart's content. And there's loads of them, actually. You've been doing it forever. Rewind live radio on Global Player and download it for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now.
Is that Raab story one you were really hankering to break in your time?
Yes
because
and no.
we get like that, don't we?
Yes and
about
no
stories.
on that one.
Yeah,
yes and no. I mean, if it depends what the result is.
Well,
my level of
way.
hanker. My
Either
level
way.
of hanker depends on how much of a bully he has been found to
Well,
have been.
we shall see. I think it might be in my time, but you never know.
You never know.
We're terribly possessive about these things.
Mm.
Thanks, James. Thanks. 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 Thanks, James.